Divorce men of Reddit, what moment with your former wife made me think yup, I'm asking this girl to divorce me. 15 years in, and I find texts on her phone. Completely blindsided. No clue she had it in her to cheat. Told me it was just texting. Begged for forgiveness. I caved. A month later, checked the phone bill to find that it never stopped. Confronted her again. Cue more begging and more denial on my part that she would let the life we had built go down in flames. This went on for a few months. So many promises. One night, I caught her on the phone when she thought I had left. Suddenly it's not just texts. Sometimes it was phone calls too. Just a friend she could talk to that she'll let things go too far with. Promised to break all contact. Swore it was never physical. Then I found emails. She detailed things that made me sick to read, but also included descriptions of his house. She broke finally, but swore it was all just in the line of duty. That's how she met, you see. Visiting nurse service, and this guy was a client. Promised she was done. Loved me, you see. No chance she was going to let 15 years go like that. I wasn't buying it anymore though. She announced she was going out one night with a work friend. Promised they were only going to the bar, then she'd be home. Maybe late, but not too late. She had taken over her own phone account by then, but wasn't bright enough to understand that Google attitude was still showing me where she was, and I wasn't about to show my hand. She kissed me goodbye and beelined right for his house, and was there until the wee hours of the morning. Once I knew where she had headed, I called her dad and my best friend to keep me from doing anything dumb. I will love them both forever for keeping me calm while my world went faking insane all around me. My father-in-law offered to stay with the kids and wait for her to get home. Around 3 AM, while couch surfing my buddy's place, she sent me a nasty text asking where the fuck I thought I was. I texted her a screenshot of her little GPS dot at her boyfriend's and let her know I'd be sending her some paperwork soon. We met and spent the first 7 years of our married life on the West Coast, then moved east. 5 years later, I took a job back on the West Coast, but it was the middle of the school year, so I went out ahead and lived on my own until everyone could join me. Things hadn't been very good between us for a while, but I hadn't articulated it to her or even myself beyond vague feelings of dissatisfaction. One weekend, out there on my own, I decided to take a day and drive to one of my favorite towns, a town in which I had lived long before I knew her, a town we had visited often while married. It was late afternoon, was about to head back to my hotel when I realized that I could visit a particular beach that had special meaning to me from my earlier life there. I stopped at a convenience store, grabbed a growlsh like I used to drink on that beach, and drove out there. Hiked out to a specific spot I remembered, sat down, popped the beer, and looked out over the ocean. And it hit me that I hadn't done that in over 20 years. Whenever we'd visit the area, I'd suggest stopping at the beach, but she wasn't interested and would always veto the idea. I'm sure reading this, it seems like the tiniest thing, but it was the catalyst for me realizing just how completely dissatisfied I was with our relationship. I think from the time I sat down, I knew it was over within maybe 10 minutes. Just sitting there, sipping my beer, looking at the ocean. Edit, RIP Inbox, and my first gold. Thanks, Redditors. I seriously thought this would be one of those I'm late to the thread so no one will read it posts. Thank you for all the incredibly kind words. Growlsh is indeed a Dutch beer. It can be had in distinctive green bottles with hinged, resealable ceramic caps. I chose it because when I had lived in that place before and had headed out to that specific beach with friends, I'd always bring growlsh. She had lost her job again after quitting a decent one because she didn't get along with her boss. Anyways, a few months go by and I'm doing everything. Cooking, laundry, dishes, yard work, etc. I'd ask the kids what does mom do all day, and they said she plays on the computer all day. So the final straw came when I came home from work and had to wash dishes so I could make dinner. Dinner is made, so I tell family it's ready. She comes to get a plate and serves herself first instead of our youngest child who was 4 at the time and couldn't serve himself. As I watched this unfold, it dawned on me If I'm going to do all the work, I might as well do it by myself or find a partner to share the load with, because she clearly didn't want to be on my team. Edit to those mentioning depression. Yes, she was, and maybe still is. She was on meds for it, and we went to counseling after the birth of one of our kids, and she had postpartum depression. At this time she stepped out on our marriage with at least 3 guys. I finally got proof with hidden caller ID and a voice activated tape recorder hidden under our bed. Yep, got to hear them having sex. Long story, but we stayed together. I don't know if the counseling helped or not. I also need to add that she was never good with money. Blew a small inheritance in record fashion. She would give me money for joint bills, and I was handing it back over so she could put gas in her car, or she had bill of hers due. One year we got a nice tax refund and she promptly tells me she owes her stepdad $2,000. What the fuck? Still stayed. In short, my earlier response was to ops question, and the edit is some background, so you know that this was something that had been building for years. Wasn't married but about 1 month away from marrying. We worked together at the same job for about a year, but she was first shift and I was second. We both had weekends off so we could and did things on the weekend. We had got everything paid for and were set. One weekend, actually on my birthday, I went to get a haircut before we went out for the night. I weirdly noticed this one car in the parking lot of our apartments. Think too much, as there was a shit ton of cars that would come and go. She had gone up to a casino with her mom the previous night and stayed overnight. That wasn't uncommon as they were both huge gamblers. I got back and did some cleaning, and she walked in. She looked at me and threw her ring on the table and said, "We need to talk. I think I like Joe more now and decided I want to be with him. I don't need the ring and you can cancel the wedding." It all clicked. That car I seen was Joe's. She didn't go up to the casino with her mom, but with Joe instead. Even more faked up as I called her mom to see how close they were to home, and she covered for her daughter. I then come to find out her friend Joe was her ex-lover, who also broke up her last engagement. He was always trying to befriend me too, and act like we were best friends. I have never felt less of a man, more ashamed and hurt than when this happened. I sacrificed a lot for her. I was there doing anything and everything for her and her family when her dad very slowly passed away, and she ends up treating me like a pet she could get rid of when she got bored. I still can't remember a few months of time after that happened. I was in a bad place. Edit. I just realized I never finished this up. It took a while to get my head straight. My best friend of over 20 years, to me a brother in family, helped me out so much. He made sure I was going to be okay and took me out to blow off steam. We took a awesome trip to some funner spots with a few other people. I owe him so much for the help. My family really helped too. I ended up meeting my fiance now about 6 months after I had that cheat happen. We have been together for over 5 years and we will be celebrating our first daughter's birthday on June 29th. Amazing what has happened since then. My one advice is, don't ever give up or think you are worthless. You are worth everything to somebody out there no matter what. I can say I'm almost embarrassed by how I reacted back then. Lol. Edit again. I never expected this to get this much attention. Thank you everybody for the kind words. And yes, my ex and I were together for about 4 years. I will say, after I met my new fiance now, about a month into dating I got a new job and got to say good riddance to the last of my ex. One of the greatest things ever. The oddest thing too was my best friend who stuck with me actually had his dad pass away my last week at work. My last day, I had told them I needed to leave at 3 PM to go help my best and his family with last minute wake and funeral stuff. They told I can't leave and they won't let me. After how my ex got everybody there to somehow feel really bad for her about leaving me, and I got left with people telling me how they feel bad for her, I just dropped my sheet on the ground and left. I remember the supervisor saying you are going to get into lots of trouble, and I looked at her dead in the eyes and go, what? Am I going to get fired? And just started laughing on my way out. I worked, she played. She woke me up in the middle of the night to grab the extra blanket off the bed. I expected to find her disgruntled on the couch alone the next morning. I found her in the guest bed with another woman, both naked. No forewarnings or clue-ins. Just despondent betrayal. I woke her for answers and got a whole lot of mumbles. Decided to split for space. That weekend we both ended up at the same bar on the same dance floor. I thought she'd followed me there to make amends. She'd brought the same girl and completely ignored me when I called out to her. When I walked up to her, she pretended I was a stranger. I told her I'm not going to play any games and didn't know what was going on. She said she didn't want to be married. I gave her the ring back and went to tell my friends goodbye that night. I didn't want to tell them why. I felt so embarrassed. She saw me talking to my friends and decided to make out in front of us with her new woman directly on the dance floor 8 feet away from where I stood, while everyone stared. Looking back now, I realize she probably was scared to come out. I can give her credit for that. But she was an awful person for the way she did it and for never having the courage to say to my face whatever she was feeling. I thought we were best friends. I thought we were going to be together forever. She asked me to marry her. Now I'm just grateful for not being with a liar and a coward. I've made a fresh start. Sold everything. Traded my entire wardrobe and style to feel like I'm in a new life. Sure, I've lost more money than I ever thought imaginable. And the dog. I just keep optimistic that I'll find someone who deserves my time. I don't focus on the past, and I have faith in God in the future. Whoever I marry next will be grateful for a man like me and loyal. But until then, I'm gonna enjoy the single life again and just play. My wife at the time told me that she had called a local radio station which often discusses hardships that military families go through and sometimes gives away $1,000 to a family in need of help. She said that she informed the radio station of my deployment and how I didn't come back the same, and she told them about our daughter, 2 months premature and only 8 months old at the time, who had numerous health problems. My wife explained to me that the radio station hadn't given away the $1,000 in quite a few weeks, so they were going to give us $10,000 for her telling such a heartfelt story. She called me while I was at work to tell me what had happened, and I was really excited. Asked my SNCOIC to help me draw up a savings plan and figure out which debts should be paid off first, etc. Things were looking up. I get home that night and, rather than being greeting with an enthusiastic hug, she points to the loft and mouths, "Not now, I'm on the phone." So I go upstairs and wait for her to finish. While I was waiting, I could hear her saying things like, "Yeah, I can get those papers to you and no problem. I can have that ready by tomorrow. HMM. Maybe they need identification and proof of my deployment or something, whatever." Fast forward to later that night, and like usual I'm having trouble sleeping. I decide to get on the computer and listen to the podcast from the radio show. After a few searches I find it and start listening to it. This is where my blood starts to boil. She told the DJs that she was a single lady living on her own and that her sister married a Marine and they had a child named Mary, our daughter's middle name. She goes on to say that Mary is now in her custody after the Marine husband, me, sort of, was killed in Afghanistan, and the mother, her IRL single sister with no kids, Jackie, was killed in a car wreck, and Mary was now my wife's responsibility. Hundreds of people called in and offered to help, many of which owned business and wanted to offer things like baby supplies or completely furnishing a nursery for her. Literally thousands of people had heard this bullshit fabricated story, including some of my coworkers. It was the radio station she was on the phone with, and they were asking her to provide death certificates and a birth certificate for Mary, which is why I was hood away. I'd found evidence of potential cheating. Despite this, I still was willing to work on things. I confronted her about her feelings towards me, not the cheating. When I point blank asked her if she was interested in counseling or trying to work things out, she said no. That was the first time. It would have been better to have stuck with it. There was a tumultuous time after that where we flip-flopped and were trying to work things out. Sorta. She complicated things. I had broached the cheating with her, and we made rules during our maintenance period. One of which was that she was no longer to have contact with her friend she was cheating with. I ended up finding out that she was still Facebook friends with him. When I calmly explained why this would hurt me, she turned it around that I was a bad guy. I started living with a friend at this point. During my drunken half-sobbing tirade where I explained everything to him, I finally realized that I don't want to be with this woman anymore. She doesn't love, respect, or care for me at all, and I deserve those things. Moved on and have since found a wonderful woman that I will marry in April. Even though I figured I would never get married again. Edit. I got hurt. It sucked. It sucked really bad. I never expected to get a divorce. I took some time to work on myself and address the mistakes that I made in my marriage and past relationships. I ended up finding a person who 100% is in sync with me and communicates like a mature adult. She is super smart and helps me through my emotions as I help her through hers. I did a complete 180 on marriage. It wasn't a struggle. It feels right. I thought long and hard. After I had decided to get married, I wanted to make sure I was not making the same mistakes again. I believe I've found my true partner and each day gives me more reasons to believe that to be true. We were together for 4 years, married for a pube hair over a year, when I was working 2 jobs, considering a third, and she sat at home, unemployed, again, for the 5th time in a 6-month period. They don't respect me. So she quit. This job isn't fulfilling. So she quit. Everybody gangs up on me. So she quit. etc. Our young puppy was not taken care of. House was a mess and I just worked anywhere from 10 to 14 hours. But sure dear, I'll walk the dog and do the dishes and get the laundry going. No problem. Watching TV or reading are difficult things to do all day. Then I call her one day from work, excited that I'm getting out early. She says she can't talk right now in a hush-hush manner, and a man's voice in the background. You can't talk right now? Why not? You have no job, and don't do a goddamn thing around the house. Beach what? Who's he? What the fuck is going on? So I'm working my dick and balls off to pay our bills, and provide for us, while you fuck around. I don't think so. She decides to stay with some family, to take time to figure out if we want to stay together. I was so blindsided by everything that was going on, and said we should talk and resolve this together. Why take time and separation to decide? Well, because this way she can fuck everyone she sees between our house and her mother's house, of course. She comes home one day because she needs clothes and puts some old, random clothes in a bag, but sneakily grabbed all of her lingerie. I didn't notice until I was putting away the laundry she didn't do and noticed it was all gone. That was the moment I left. I didn't give a fuck anymore. I'm done. It's not worth it. The lies, manipulation, selfishness, all of it. I'm done. I'm not going to be your little bitch anymore. No more free meal ticket for you, ya cunt. Then, for her final power play, she did the classic I'm suicidal, I'm an alcoholic, bipolar sex addict, and went to a mental hospital. She was released in 3 days, diagnosed with nothing. By beach. As much as it absolutely kills me, I even let her keep the dog, because it would be a better life for him. She has a yard, and her family's dogs, that he grew up with and played with. I had to move to my parents' basement, with no yard, and I work a new job on an off shift. Now I'm moving across the country, with a better job, with a better prettier woman, in a better town, minus a complete psychopath. Even if nobody reads this, it was slightly therapeutic to type out. So, I'm partly to blame. I'm not without fault in this. While was deployed to Afghanistan, she had an affair. This is far too common a story on its own. At the time, I was still very religious. I sought to repair the marriage and make things work. I told her I never wanted to talk about it again and that she was forgiven yet on notice. So, to speak. For the next 2 years we were both pretty shitty. She never believed me when I told her she was forgiven, and she truly was. She was scared I would cheat on her to get revenge. This made her jealous and controlling. She didn't want me to have female friends, associate with other female soldiers in my unit, typical crazy beach stuff. This was a big factor in the divorce, but not the tipping point. I did learn from it. Thought, I'm not a player, but I won't ever be with a jealous gal again. Again, I was not without blame. I had a lot of anger and problems. When I came back, I'd get off work and go buy some 40s, sit in a parking lot and drink, rather than go home and try to fix things with her. My anger often got the best of me. I'd never raise a hand against her, let alone my voice. But she would push me to a point where I knew I would. So I'd leave for a couple of days to cool off. Maybe this wasn't the best course of action, but it kept me sane. I eventually got bored and volunteered for a tour of duty in South Korea. My first week out of the country she faked another man. That was the point where I was done. I married far too young and could have been a better husband. But I take it as a learning experience. Something that did make me a better man and a better husband for whatever girl comes into my life. I started dating a high school friend when I was 23. 2 months after dating, she who shall not be named got laid off. 6 months later, she still wasn't working, and I was pressured into marrying her by her parents. Like a dumbass, I gave in. We got married, and 2 years later, she still hadn't found work. Not because of the economy, but because she couldn't get off her lazy ass and look. At the time, she was 25, didn't have a job, and didn't have a license. Her excuse was, how will I get to work? A couple of times a week, she would go out with friends while I was busting my ass off working 3 jobs. She opened a credit card in both our names and would use it for shopping. I remember losing my shit one day because she spent over $300 on 4 bras at Victoria's Secret. You might be wondering, how in the hell? She was a natural 42DD. Once you break 38DD mark, bras skyrocket in price. Big boobs are expensive, gentlemen. Every time I paid that sheet off, she would go out and rack up the debt again. Finally, I decided I had had enough. Nothing I could do would change her, and I was no longer emotionally attached to her. On the 1st of the month of June 2010, I paid off the credit card, called the credit company, and cancelled the card. I then paid the rent in full. I told the management to take me off the lease and that we would be out by July 1st. I secured a place for myself and prepared for the sheet storm that was headed my way. The following day, I got home and she was sitting down watching some sheet show on TV. The laundry hadn't been done, the dishes were still dirty, and the place was a mess. This was a common occurrence that no matter how many times I begged her to clean while I was gone, never got done. I walked into the living room, shut off the TV, dropped my house key on the table and said, "Voldemort, I'm faking done. Despite trying everything to motivate you and doing everything I can to make this work, it's just simply not going to happen. I paid the rent for the month and you have 30 days to find a place and move out. I'm leaving everything here for you, TVs, couch, bed, Wi-Fi, computer, etc. And I'm only taking my clothes from the closet. I will be out tonight." I gathered my clothes and left. I felt relieved. So much stress gone, just like that. I didn't get but 3 miles before my phone was ringing off the hook with her mom yelling at me and delivering death threats. The next day, I had my attorney contact her and start the divorce process. It has been heaven ever since. So that's how I broke free from the Dark Lord's spell. I didn't want a divorce when I realized her drinking was becoming a serious problem. I didn't want a divorce when she ended up comatose from liver failure. I didn't want a divorce when the hospital bills broke through the $1 million cap. I didn't want a divorce when she came out of the coma and tried to get her life back on track. I didn't want a divorce when she became addicted to opioids. I didn't want a divorce when she became addicted to Ambien. I didn't want a divorce when her pill doctor was arrested and she couldn't get her drugs anymore. I didn't want a divorce when she started drinking again. I didn't want a divorce when I was broke, unemployed and hopeless and all I could think of was how to keep food in our kitchen and my son in school. It was then I realized that if she went back up north and lived in the same town as her large family, she could get the help necessary to get better, and I could reduce expenses and see our son graduate high school. The moment I said, "Yup, I want a divorce," was the day she left. Her brother had come down and would drive a U-Haul back up north with her and her stuff. That day, she decided and became adamant that she was taking our only vehicle as well. We live 13 miles from supermarkets, fast food, gas stations, etc. and 26 miles from my son's school. Not having a vehicle wasn't an option, so I stood my ground. She got so mad, and we fought so hard, my son got involved, screaming at her that she can't stand us and she needed to leave right now. So she left. And I started getting back on my feet. The following year, I flew her back for her son's graduation. We were cordial, had a pretty good time, then she left. And that's the last I heard from her, until the following year, when I was served divorce papers. We're now divorced, I've moved and I'm back to being confident and successful. I've talked to her once or twice since then, and I'm happier than I've ever been. Obligatory, not my former wife, but with my fiance. The moment we went to the bank. We'd been together over 4 years, engaged for 1.5. If circumstances had gone our way a little more than they had, we would have been married. I know it. She really was my soulmate. We connected from the moment we met each other, and through thick and thin, the ups and the downs, we were always there for each other, understood each other. We'd been saving to buy a house together. That was the plan. Buy the house, get married, settle down and have kids. She had a debt issue. I knew that when we first started dating, but she'd been working to pay it off, and she had, and here we were, ready to buy a house. This was our year. We went to a couple of open houses, for fun, to see what we could afford in our price range, to imagine ourselves living there together, snuggled up watching TV, or laying in bed with a book, or breakfast in bed together, or whatever. It didn't matter. Just her and myself in our own home together. We went to the bank together, mostly for my own financial purposes, but when my advisor asked if we wanted to get a mortgage pre-approval, just to see what the bank said we could do, why not? We weren't going to rush into anything right away. I said yes. She clutched my leg and said no. We left. Nerves, she said. It's a big step in our lives together. I knew that. The thought of going to those open houses terrified me. Before we did it, we were crossing that boundary between just talking about it and it's real. I'll let it be for a while. Not a big deal, but something didn't sit right. After dinner I sat her down, asked her. Nerves, she reaffirmed. I still didn't buy it. I pushed her to tell me. I knew something was up. She started to cry. If I tell you, you'll leave me. I told her I wouldn't. I couldn't. There was no money. The substantial amount of money she assured me she was saving up didn't exist. She had nothing. And not just nothing, but the money she claimed she had she was actually in debt to the bank for. The amount she told me she was in debt for when we first started dating, that was a significantly reduced amount. I was in shock. I went into the shower and cried like a baby. Our plans, they never really existed. My fiance, she consistently lied to me for over 4 years. I couldn't believe it. She threw away so much money to keep the lie going. She needed a new car. I told her she could afford a new one, so she went and bought a brand new one. She spent a ridiculous amount of money on me and my family for Christmas gifts, pretty much gifts for any holiday she went big for. We even had an evening out celebration of her paying off her debt. Finally, it was supposed to mark a new beginning of our lives moving forward. It wasn't real. She even picked on my own family members who were irresponsible with their finances, with us never realizing that she was potentially even worse off. I didn't sleep on it. The next morning I helped her pack her things and she left. I cried again. But 2 days later I asked if she wanted to meet to work things out. She agreed. I thought I could look past it. We tried for a few more weeks, but I couldn't. I couldn't look at her the same way. I couldn't trust the words that came out of her mouth. I left for a second time. A month later, after lots of introspection and reflection, I saw her side of it. The embarrassment of revealing the debt in its true form in the first place, then the realization that the hole was dug too deep and there's no way out. I sent her an email asking if she wanted to talk, not to commit to anything, but to see if we could slowly rebuild what we had together. I still loved her with my whole heart, and I wanted to make this us work. She agreed, and we started talking. Then the second moment came. In the few short weeks we'd been apart, she joined Tinder, which wasn't a bad thing in and of itself, but then I found out she'd been on 4 separate dates, or so she says. 3 with one guy. She hated it, she claimed. She said she compared them to me, but they weren't the same. She did it to try to ease the pain, she said. It didn't make sense to me. Couldn't she have figured that out from a single date? How did she make it to 4 before this realization kicked in? I dreamt at night of her, dressed up as beautiful as she always was, but with someone who wasn't me. At a fancy restaurant, the kiss afterwards, the ride home together. I couldn't do it. She swore she never had sex with anyone, but she also swore up and down that she never had anything to hide to begin with. I couldn't do it. I couldn't trust that she was telling me the truth. And I thought I knew when she was lying, but she did such a good job pulling the wool over my eyes that I had no idea what to look for, what the signs would be. I told her I couldn't do it, and I stopped talking to her. That was a week ago. I miss her terribly, I really do. I still love her, no less than a week ago, or a month ago, or a year ago. I wanted us to work out so badly. But that once a combo of the lying, then jumping straight to dating other men so quickly, she never even reached out, never said hi, never asked how I was doing. She isn't the same woman to me who I thought she was, and that's what's tearing me apart inside. Because in my heart I still have my baby girl from 2 months ago, when things were perfect, and I was blissfully ignorant, and that's what I want so badly. But I know it shouldn't, can't, be. The woman in my heart is gone, and I don't think she ever really existed in the first place. I don't know what hurts more. The fact that she lied, or the fact that she maybe didn't love me as much as she said she did, not enough to deter her from seeing other men. I'd been married for 14 years. We split up the day before our anniversary. I was faking tired. When I had something happen to me, it wasn't a problem. When something happened to her, it was the worst. One example is a year-long cardiac issue on my end. Arrhythmia, stress tests, Holter monitors, specialist appointments, that sort of thing. On her end, one time she forgot to eat lunch and choked on some too hot food and hit her head when she passed out. Those were, in her mind, equivalent. There are other examples. When I lost my job and told her I was having trouble mentally, she told me, quote, "Just try harder," and that was the sum total of emotional support I got in 14 years of marriage. By surprise one day, I found out I was seriously sensitive to a medication. I passed out for a couple of days, did a lot of vomiting. My body kept throwing firmware errors when I tried to wake up. Not a username joke, it's the best way to describe it. And I was more than a little disappointed when I didn't wake up in the hospital. I lost 8 pounds in a couple of days, and 5 of those pounds never really found their way back on. She was mad that I'd lost weight. She went on vacations every year with her teams and clubs. She thought of my work trips as equivalent to vacation, so I never got any time off. We only had short kid trips to the next city, and before that was our honeymoon. Conversations were a nightmare. If I phrased anything imperfectly, she'd hold it against me for years. I told her that sex was a way to feel an emotional bond or something like that, and she kept bringing it up that that's how you feel love. So it was nearly impossible to say anything important about anything at all. I couldn't relax at home. I couldn't feel like I couldn't say things or do things without it being recorded mentally and thrown back at me. It was like being on camera all the time, and it felt like she was just trying to trap me with any given conversation. She still does this, trying to get me to agree to oddly specific phrases, or bringing up old issues over email after they've been resolved, like the time I caught her stealing money from the children. In the last year, she just kept asking me, weekly, daily, if I was cheating. She'd been refusing any kind of sex, told me to stop asking, and when she initiated anything I'd have to guess exactly what she wanted, no questioning from me, and any mistake ended up with her crying. It was dreadful. So, I kicked my owners to get into better shape. I went from pear to V, and lost a bunch of weight, and put on a bunch of muscle. I hired a trainer from the gym, and she had a party and I wrote it on the calendar in the kitchen. Who is Susan, accusing me of flirting with the clerks in stores when I was there with my ex. I still remember her saying, in bed, that I'd gained a lot of muscle, and I was sad that she'd noticed, because she really shouldn't have taken so long, that she should have noticed. In counseling, she'd said that she never asked me to do any of the fitness stuff, and my inside voice was screaming, yes, you did. Every time you said I wasn't sexy enough. I ended up losing a total of 90 pounds from the time we met to the time we split. So yes, I looked at porn. She was fine with it at the start, then somewhere along the line she conflated born and cheating, and eventually even masturbation and cheating. The damnable thing about this is that, if anyone knew much about me, you'd know how much I dislike germs, so no, I wouldn't put my lips or junk on a stranger's face and or tackle a box. I tried to explain that, look, if I won't eat leftover desserts from the kids' plates, what makes you think I'd be comfortable with cheating? I discovered later that there was a very high likelihood that she had cheated on me, and more than once. I suppose in retrospect the conversation that started with how chlamydia can stay in the body for a long time should have been more of a red flag. We were each other's firsts, and at some point I developed HPV, but who knows where that came from? I suspect some of her major health issues stemmed from complications from an abortion after I'd been sterilized. In all honesty, whatever, I don't care about her anymore other than I hope she's healthy, because we share custody of our kids and I don't want to go to her funeral until the kids are a lot older. She looks like hell though, easily up more than 300 pounds. I hope she gets better. So what was the final straw? When I realized that she wanted all the time in the world to fix any problem she was facing, and that I had to face all of mine alone and fix them overnight, or sooner if possible. In the morning after the last counseling session, she asked me if I thought it was okay to lie to people that you're in a relationship with. And of course, yes, there are lies that are acceptable. I went to the anniversary dinner alone. The waitress camped my meal point sometime after the split. I was talking to someone online about his ex. He was beaten up on the regular with her flailing her forearms at him, making her physical abuse look like defensive wounds, and like he'd grabbed her hard. He was only able to escape once cheap cameras were available and easily hidden. When he heard my story, he said, "Amen, brother," and it wasn't until then that I realized that my ex was an abusive cheater that kept gaslighting me. On the upside, when the divorce was finalized, the papers were ready a day early, so I went and got them and posed with the process server for a Facebook photo. It was a regular Thursday, but my American friends wondered in amazement how I got served on a holiday. We celebrate our national holiday a few days earlier up here, so I was given my divorce papers on Independence Day. We ended up in a long distance situation, and I was going to get a green card so I could live with her for months. She had been slowly losing interest, but I tried to make it work. She got less and less enthusiastic about spending time with me as the days went on. Anytime I tried to talk to her about things, she'd get super angry and dismissive. Overall I was miserable as hell, but desperately wanted to save our dying relationship. Then she ghosted me for a week, then came out of that saying that she was not happy. We agreed that we needed some time to think about what we wanted to do. I decided I no longer want to be miserable. I needed to put my foot down because frankly, the way she was cold toward me for so long was not good enough, and I was not happy. Was not a justification for months of getting the cold shoulder. She could have said something months ago, or talked to me about it earlier instead of getting shitty at me and acting like nothing was wrong. So after that, I put my foot down in early February. I told her I wished to go our separate ways. The real kicker? 2 weeks ago I got a letter saying my petition for the green card has been approved. What would have been an exciting time ended up making me very depressed. A woman here with an ex-wife, so I'll toss my 2 cents in. She was a vegetarian. Fine. I was making a bacon dish to take to a night party, and she started telling me I was overcooking the bacon. This, out of context, might seem like nothing, but she was constantly critical of me. She refused to drive, but would tell me how to drive all the time. Told me I was too ditzy to manage without her. Would go through the trash after I threw anything away to see what it was and if I was allowed to throw it away. The bacon was the last faking straw. I asked her if she was going to have some. She said no. I said maybe, in that case, she should just let me fuck up the bacon and keep her mouth shut. I worked full-time and over full-time to support us because she was new to the country and could not legally work. In exchange she did next to nothing. She didn't clean, she didn't cook anything, she just behaved like a child, made huge messes, then expected me to come home from a stressful job and take care of it all. We talked about it, she'd agree, things would be fine for a few hours, then the pattern would repeat. I was not allowed to have friends or hobbies. She'd get mad, we were both writers, if I wrote with anyone else online. She'd accuse me of cheating on her, even though I'd show her every story and every message. If I wasn't paying attention to her, or 1000% every second of the day, she'd get pissed off. She'd get pissed off if I went to lunch with friends without her. She expected to be an appendage, not a spouse. So many more stories. So glad I got the fuck out of there. She asked me if I was going to buy her a new iPhone. The night before she called the cops with false allegations of abuse. She told my sister that she had an ugly baby. When I said I wanted to name any future son of mine after my friend who died in Iraq, she told me he had an ugly name. She told me she wished I was still overseas after 3 separate deployments. Man, the list could go on. Best divorce ever. Edit. Fuck it. She wouldn't take me to the hospital for a mandatory appointment and told me to drive myself. Surgery on both eyes. She openly admitting to hoping my father would pass away for inheritance purposes. Maximed out a credit card. I couldn't afford a packet of gum because the whole paycheck was spent. The day of that paycheck being put in my account, I was deployed. Told her parents that I was spending all the money so that they would give her cash, and I didn't know about it till we started the divorce. She claimed I owed them money due to this in the settlement. After introducing her to my friend and his wife, she said only lesbians join the army. This was right after my friend's wife just said she used to serve in the army. She said that within 2 minutes of my friend's wife saying she was a veteran. This is the best thing that ever happened to me. So no shit, there I was. I was driving home from work and a really weird text message and phone number that I didn't recognize pops up on the screen of my iPhone. The message said testing 123. I began starting to type back, who is this? And another text message pops up that say I'm getting the message. Then this is my new number. So you have it now. So I stopped typing and didn't send it. Then, still a little puzzled because I don't recognize the phone numbers, a text conversation begins. So I just sit back and watch. The highlights of the conversation were that was so hot. How do you think I should tell him? And he is so stupid. Along with I wish he was still out of town so I could be with you tonight. I had just returned from a week-long business trip the day before. And other insulting and incriminating banter. As the conversation progressed, needless to say I figured out who at least one of the texting people was. I arrived home from work and confronted her. She of course appeared, faked, to be completely shocked that I would even question her purity and virtuousness, and denied and then denied it some more. This of course began to exponentially disgust me. I mean, no, when you're busted FFS. I won't even leave out the part where I told her she's a dirty hoe, a horrible human being who doesn't care about anyone but herself, and a liar, etc. We had 2 kids, 2 and 5 at the time, so I was the most pissed about what she had just done to them. Nonetheless, she continued to deny it, so I started reading her text messages to her. So faking busted. Oh, but wait, it gets better. It seems that she had secretly bought a new phone that she could hide in order to be able to text her new squeeze without me discovering any accidentally not deleted photos, emails, text messages, etc. Which I'll get to in a moment. But she of course was going to need a playlist with some good Sech music, so she, being technologically illiterate, plugged her new phone into our computer in order to download our music from iTunes, but didn't know what she was doing. And voila, I start receiving her text messages. This is the moment I was like, fuck this. We are so done. As I would never again, and to this day don't trust her. Now I could end this story here, but there's more that's just too good not to share. So being the dumpty, what she is, with the cat out of the bag, it's clear now that I know what's up, and we are getting a divorce. She asks me to fix her new phone, so that I won't get her text messages anymore. At first I say fuck off, I'm not your it guy anymore. She tries to fix it herself and fails. I'm still getting her text messages on my phone, although she thinks I'm not. I'll let this go for a few days, reading insults about myself and some other pretty painful shit. So, I finally explained to her that I didn't want to get her text messages anymore because I didn't want to keep reading this stuff about myself, and agreed to fix it for her. So she gives me her phone. I told her I would also need her old phone to transfer everything onto her new phone for her. Remember, she's computer illiterate. Unbeknownst to her, I had downloaded some iPhone recovery software prior to this false offer of assistance born out of pain and defeat. So I recovered all of her text messages, photos, emails, several online dating profile screen names and passwords, etc. Even everything that had been previously deleted. Didn't tell her and gave her back her phone. Point when reviewing the data later, I learned she had been cheating for a couple of years. However, it was all with women. She was secretly a lesbian. Not bi, mind you, but straight up lesbian. And to be clear, I have no issue with that. I have issue with being lied to, cheated on, used and played for a fool. Let's just say the deleted photos and text messages were super hot. Lol. I also learned her true nature from this data. We were married for 10 years. Together for 12. Anniversary in July. You think you know someone after all that time. Year 9. October. We become foster parents to an amazing 8-month-old boy. However, we argue a lot. I get attached to him, and we decide to pursue adopting him in January. We still argue a lot. Obviously both of us aren't happy. Mid-July I explained to her that I don't know if our marriage is strong enough to adopt him because we fight a lot, and I don't want to adopt a kid into a home that is broken, and suggest we go to counseling before we adopt him. I'm told it's just a rough patch, and that she's forever committed. No need for counseling. 10th anniversary rolls around in the end of July. Being a good husband, I bought her a big fat diamond anniversary ring. Adoption goes through in August. Divorcing in September. SMDH. The data grab revealed her years of cheating. Her plan since the conception of adoption. To go ahead with the adoption, but divorce me shortly after, thereby shoring up many years of future child support for 2 kids rather than 1. Her plan to wait until after the 10th anniversary in order to score maximum alimony and then move her girlfriend into our house so the 2 of them could forever sponge off of me and live happily ever after. Her secret money stash and credit cards. And, drumroll please, the drug problem she was also hiding. Yes, I know, now that I was an oblivious idiot. Lol. Once the divorce was happening in October, her true colors began to show. She beat me to the punch on filing for the divorce and checked the box full custody for her, no visitation for me. I lost my mind. She gets a safe to keep her secrets, drugs, credit card bills, court papers, etc. However, I cracked a safe and didn't tell her because I wanted to see what else she'd put in there. She used my daughter's birthday as the combo, which I guessed on about the 10th try. Lol. Yeah, that kind of dumb. She, for reasons I still don't understand, not knowing that I knew everything at this point, went nuts telling me she was going to take my kids away and I'd never see them again. She was going to take the house and gloating that she and her new girlfriend would live there and I'd be paying her for the rest of my life. Pure venom for no reason other than my discovering her secrets. This badgering all day every day became more than I could bear. But I also knew, if I moved out, she gets the house and kids and the ball is in her court. So I stayed. But ultimately, one day after listening to her lies, knowing she was doing drugs, stealing mail from my lawyer, stealing checks made out to me, and being able to take no more, I told her that I had the data. She called me a liar, said I didn't know shit. I whipped out my phone, opened up one of her most scandalous deleted such photos, showed it to her, and said this one's my favorite. Bahahaha. Seriously, one of the most satisfying moments of my life. I then explained to her that even with support and alimony she can't afford the house we live in, which actually may not have been ultimately accurate, not knowing how much alimony and support could end up being, but I believed it at the time. Therefore a judge would automatically award me the house. Also because of that, my stable work history, her drug problem and fiduciary shenanigans, that a judge would also award me the kids. I wouldn't have to pay her shit, and when I was done with her she'd never see her kids again. All I'm going to say is it was faking priceless. Lol. And my lawyer was awesome. Long story short, she realized I was right and begged me not to take the kids from her. Although why should I even listen to her? She was fully prepared to completely fuck my life and her kid's life up, just like she was faking her own life up. This is long. Lol. I'll just sum it up by saying I agreed to give her 50/50 custody after a hab and showing me she had her sheet together. I didn't want my kids to not know their mother even if she's crazy. They deserve to draw their own conclusions and I know they will. However, she had to agree to give me almost everything. The house, truck, trailer, motorcycle, retirement, agree to minimal child support and no alimony, which she did. I did agree to split the savings with her if she gave me back the diamond anniversary ring. So, take that beach. You just got beat at your own game lol. Now I'm the happiest I've been in 10 years. Enjoying my freedom, dating and just generally having a blast. Best thing that ever happened to me. I was deployed to Iraq in 2009. I know. I haven't even read the comments on here yet, but I'm sure there are about 100 of these stories. And my wife went to live with her mom in Texas while I was gone so we could save money. About 2 months in, things got strange and I see this guy all over her Facebook. I asked her about it and she said I was just jealous and it resulted in a fight. A little while after that she sent me an email that she has a crush on one of her friends. Big fight occurs over the phone. I told her we need to go to counseling, but she can't hang around that guy anymore. She said no, because that was her only group of friends and blah blah. I faking conceded and dropped it. I knew I could do nothing while overseas, and the fighting was a severed distraction while I was over there. But I then had the bright idea to look at our cell phone bill. And what do you know? This same number is calling her at all hours of the night, almost every night. I call it, and it's some dude, and I put the pieces of the puzzle together. I tuck that away in the back of my mind. I come home, and things are okay. But she's acting shady with her phone, and getting strange texts from a girl's name, saying babe and I love you. I remember about the cell phone call log, and realize she's talking to this dude while I'm at work, still in the Marines. So after a few days of not looking forward to the convo, I confronted her. She initially lied, but eventually came clean. We separated right before Christmas and divorced that spring. One thing to note, I really chose to ignore reality to get through the deployment. Once I got home I just wanted someone to be there. That's why I didn't ask her more about the guy after a while. My ex-wife had a history of sociopathic tendencies while we were dating. At 17, she told me her parents were killed in a car accident. When we drove through a particular intersection on a date, she started bawling. That was the spot. When I tried to introduce her to my friends, she aggressively asked their names and then claimed to be very sick and she couldn't go. Turns out she was using a fabricated name. That was a deal breaker, and I later found out her parents were well and alive. I found this out because the promise ring she gave me was actually her grandmother's ring, and her psychotic mother called me demanding legal recourse if I did not return it. Fast forward 5 years, and she contacts me out of the blue telling me how everything is better now with counseling, and she'd like to meet as friends. We go on a few dates, hook up once and bam, she vanishes. As like a complete ghosting. This was in 2003. Fast forward again 4 more years and I randomly hear from her on a group email about a wine party she's hostessing. I was just getting out of a 3-year relationship and we started talking a bit. She invited me to see her. Long story shorter, I did. We hit it off. But the constant questioning of her lies, a miscarriage, random midnight texts and phone calls, flirting, stuck with me. After I proposed, things were great at the time and she looked amazing. She refused to wear her ring because it reflected her tips at the restaurant. Red flag. 2 weeks before the wedding, she took a week trip to Minnesota and was practically unavailable, but going out every night with friends. Later on, these friends she spoke of were sending her personal CDs, and she went on my Facebook and blocked them from me seeing messages to her. Turns out she was hooking up with one of the guys in her mother's driveway. The day before our wedding, we filled out the paperwork, and she listed this as her second marriage. I asked her about it, and she lied through her teeth about having some drunk in an old marriage she claimed she told me about. Court papers later showed she was married for almost 2 years to the guy. At this point, money was spent, $50,000, from her dad, and family was in town. Within a year I was finding love letters and the norm for cheating. After a blowout fight and macup, she found out she was pregnant. I questioned her about the DNA testing, and she told me she'd divorce me if I did one. I realized that regardless of it being mine or someone else's, her family completely disowned her. She had no money, and if in fact the baby was mine, I would never want him on the street. I let her stay and we occupied different rooms for the majority of the next few years. The final straw was her taking her best guy friend to a wedding I couldn't attend, apparently staying for about an hour before leaving. My brother was at the wedding and confirmed this, and spending the night with this guy. I confronted her the next day, and she told me I was jealous. That night I woke up to the two of them in each other's laps watching a movie at 3 AM. My disliking of this was again told that I was jealous. So, 2 weeks later the asshole shows up at my doorstep when I'm slammed with work all weekend. I knew at that point that shit wasn't right. It was around Thanksgiving. I went to the store to get stuffing for the cooking turkey, and when I offered to take her friend, she told me no, I'd corrupt him. I used one of my music recorders, turned it on, and slid it under the couch before my son and I took a nice long trip to the store. On the way back, 45 minutes. Figured that should be enough time. She called and told me to get a pizza because they were hungry now. I dropped off my son, grabbed my recorder, and proceeded to listen to them fuck while I grabbed the pizza. I came home, set up my 1000-watt DJ speaker, plugged up the phone, and invited them on from outside. I played it for about 45 seconds. My wife's response was obviously she was caught but not guilty. Sociopath. No emotion. How dare you play something like that in front of my child? Although violence was warranted, I didn't give two shits about her. I told her friend that I would anticipate him not trespassing in my house, and that I was going to give my son a bath. I guessed that it would be in his best interest to not be in my home when I came downstairs for my son's dinner. I calmly did so, while my ex screamed at me telling me how she couldn't believe how I embarrassed her and her friend. She took a trip to see her mother for 30 days. I talked to a lawyer. We still discuss counseling for her sickness. She changed her and my son's address without my knowledge and drained the entire bank account. I told her I could not pay for the utilities, and she told me that she doesn't think she should pay for them since she wasn't in the house. The day she was supposed to return, she signed a document she didn't show. I filed the next day. So, yeah, don't marry a sociopath. Although I have been in the right in every way, I pay through my teeth to get my son and she completely violates our settlement. 3 different lawyers' responses were, it will cost over $10,000, and she'll pretty much just get a slap on the wrist from a judge. Gotta love being a father who wants to be one in South Carolina. And, my child support in the private school she gets to send him to takes about 50% of my income. At least I have an amazing son and a faked up story out of it. And my parents like me a lot more, since I love with them. She ended up remarrying one of the barfly bachelors from the restaurant she worked at a year later. The same guy that would brag about his womanizing and threesome escapades. When she drove home at 4 AM, wasted hour of her mind for the zillionth time, and passed out mid-text message, I started reading and realized she'd been having an affair for the last couple of months. She was an alcoholic and had cheated on me in the past, but this was different. I realized that she couldn't be a mother to our son anymore with her issues, and she had started looking for a new meal ticket the second I was laid off from my job. My divorce went better than others. I got semi-faked financially on our debt, but I have full custody, and she is ordered to pay me child support. She doesn't. Things got nasty when I asked her to move out, and she got physical with me again, but this time I called the cops. Holy shit, is discrimination against men real when it comes to these things? I thought I was gonna be the one to go to jail. They asked me 100 times if I hit her. I didn't. They asked me what I did to provoke her. They refused to take pictures of my bleeding head injuries and implied I did it to myself. The lead cop was a lady cop too. She should have gotten a felony for PFMA in front of a child, but of course, even though she was drunk and I was the one who actually took care of our son all the time, the cops asked me to find somewhere else to stay for the night and they refused to arrest her. I feel like if I was drunk and beating the shit out of my wife in front of our kid I would probably still be sitting in jail right now. But I guess you get a golden pass if you have two X chromosomes in our criminal and family court systems. Just read through this thread and you will see I'm far better off than most men who are divorced, and as a loving father it really pisses me off that people who advocate for men's rights or criticize feminism are decried as misogynistic sexists. If feminists really cared about actual equality these issues would be their issues as much as they are men's issues. When I caught her lying about going out to a dance club with her friends from work, it turns out she'd been dropped off by those friends at her manager's house and they left town together for the weekend. I'd been working 16-hour days and was pretty wiped that week. She wanted to go dancing with her friends in Houston and stay over the weekend, which I was fine with. I had my suspicions because of texts that previously popped up in the middle of the night. Once, I reached to turn off her phone and saw a text that said something like "I'm glad I kissed you." I dismissed it out of exhaustion. Well, our phones had the family locator enabled, so I checked her location that night. She went to Houston. She said she'd be downtown. She was actually way out in West Houston at a hotel. I texted her and asked where she was. She responded by telling me she was in a loud club and couldn't talk. I called a few times and she finally picked up. I asked again where she was. She deflected the question, but when I told her what hotel she was in and asked her if she was faking her manager, she started laughing. That shit hurt. I hung up, drank a few shots of rum, and went to sleep. I started the divorce process the next Monday. Best decision ever. Met an awesome girl a few years later that builds theme park rides. We've been married for about 18 months. Kid on the way. Edit. I cam splel gooder. Had an old school friend tell me of his divorce. They were together from university, then ended up living in Manchester. They seemed like a very fun couple, loving and enjoying life. They ended up having 2 kids and that's when the mother went crazy. She started insisting her boy of 2 years wanted to be a girl, started changing his pronouns, dress sense, toys and everything about this boy's life was about a girl. At this point my friend, the dad, didn't really mind. He thought this was a phase and his wife would change. The boy hit school age 4 in the UK and went to school. He started to enjoy boy toys, play with boys, roughhousing with other boys, and wanting to be a boy. The boy told his mum, and his mum insisted he was a girl. Arguments ensued and the mum doubled down, brought around experts who agreed with her the boy wanted to be a girl. So the mother said this settled the issue, got the boy's ears pierced, started over time with the conversion of the young boy to a girl. This continued until he went to secondary school, and as soon as his hormones kicked in, the boy realized he was a boy, wanted to be a boy, and he started really hating his mum for what she put him through. All his family photos were of him as a girl, his clothes, toys, room, and even the school kids coming up to secondary school with him saw him as a boy who was forced to live a girl. When the boy was around 13 to 14, he went on a DV trip, learning camping and wilderness stuff. The boy wandered off in the middle of the night and no one noticed. In the morning the teachers and adults went searching, and they couldn't find him. Then there was shouting from the kids. They found his body leaned up against a tree, slits going from hand to elbow crease, and note in his hand saying "I always wanted to be a boy, but she wouldn't let me." Upon hearing the news, the dad was distraught, trying to contain his family and keep it going. The wife started attacking the school for not supporting him as a girl, the dad for not promoting and encouraging him to be a girl, and even the boy's sister for not supporting him. She started to get worse with each week, hitting the daughter and the husband, moving on to using objects, and eventually she tried to attack the husband with a serrated bread knife. Shouting, "It's all your fault. I'm going to take everything from you. You will end up with nothing." Husband, thinking it was a heated argument, threat ignored what she said. About a week later the divorce papers came. During the hearing the wife basically laid all blame down on the daughter and husband, made the husband out to be abusive, attacked her, tried to rap their son because he was a girl in her eyes, and so on. None of it being true. The verdict came in. The husband lost his house, rights to access of his last child, had to pay custody to the mother and expenses for the court case. The dad, upon hearing this, realized he lost his son, home, wife, daughter, and with no immediate family alive, Had nowhere to live. After the hearing he came to talk to me, told me everything, and we got pretty drunk. Watching grown men cry is hard on a person. I put him up until he could get his life in some kind of order. The next day a dog walker found his body at a spot overlooking the countryside. He hung himself on a tree. The mother is alive, and so is the daughter. No idea where they are, but I did see them moving out of the house. At my friend's funeral, there was me, some more of his friends, and that's it. No ex-wife or daughter. First time I've shared this, and it's hard to repeat it. So, before I write this, I would just like to say I'm a 27-year-old female, and I'm telling the story of my father, and when he knew it was time to divorce my biological momaka, the uterus as I commonly refer to her. My father passed when I was 17, so this is his posthumous tale. My biological mother was extremely abusive, both physically and mentally, hell, spiritually even. She cheated on my father shamelessly. As a child I remember her throwing things at his head and leaving for days and coming back home when my father had his paycheck. I remember watching my father cry in the kitchen sometimes when he thought I wasn't looking. He tried to stay in the marriage for the sake of me not being part of a broken family. He tried his best to make my childhood as normal as he could. I also had a half sister whom shared the same mom but different dad. My mother was so tasteless, and she would often take my sister with her and have sex right in front of her. Needless to say, my half sister grew up with the preconceived notion that sex equals love. She was pregnant at 15 and married at 17. Anyway, not to digress, the breaking point for my dad was when my mom dropped me off one night at 1 AM on a school night and went back out to a family party. My father was getting me ready for bed and I asked him why. Did mommy have her tongue in someone's mouth? Threshold had been reached. What I distinctly remember was how my dad handled such abuse with such dignity. I woke up to his things gone and my mother back home cursing and threatening to make his life hell and waging war on him. She told me I'd never see him again. I went into hysterics. My father came back and bought me a present and apologized and tried to explain to me he'd see me on weekends. I wasn't having it. I would cry non-stop. My mother couldn't take it and told my father to pick me up. She remarried a few months later and tried to go for full custody, but my father fought tooth and nail. He won after having a psychologist deem her mentally unstable and unsafe. I guess the only reason I wanted to write this was I'm reading these stories and I see my childhood, and as an adult I have an intense sense of gratitude for my father. For going through what he did, and raising me the way he did with what he had. I sincerely also wanted to say thanks to the men who have children, or who do not have, going through such torment and malice the way you guys have. You never know who else is impacted, and I can say in the truest sense my dad is a hero for going through what he did, and also showing me what unconditional love is, and I wake up every day appreciative for it. I also thank the uterus too, for showing me the woman I do not want to ever be, and sex does not equal love. She passed away a year ago, died alone on her deathbed. It wasn't the silent treatments, or the emotional outbursts over slights no one else could understand. It wasn't the years of manipulation and unhinged punishments. It wasn't letting myself be isolated by her from my friends and family. It wasn't even the violence. It was my son. I was afraid to file for a long time as I was afraid custody of my son could go to his crazy mom that was unable to love or care for him. It wasn't until a particularly violent night from her, where I walked away 3 times and never even defended myself, and she threatened to and called lied to police to have me arrested. I was bleeding and red all over, not seriously injured, and I wouldn't have called the cops, but to be hauled off and abused by the legal system for being the victim of the crime you are punished as the perpetrator of until later acquitted sucks. As soon as she threatened how she could have me arrested, after I let her be violent and no resistance in 2 engagements that night, one while she held my 2-year-old son, as soon as the threat was made I locked myself in the office and started researching divorce lawyers. When the cops arrived and she made good on her threat, they spent half a minute talking to the bleeding guy, 30 minutes talking to the perpetrator, and I was gone from my home, work, and son until acquitted. As soon as I was in handcuffs I knew there was nothing on earth that could keep me from filing for divorce and fighting for custody of my son. that any risk would be better than being raised in the home and marriage he was made throw away after reading, because you rob me of solitude, but provide me with no companionship, because I realized how spot on that was. My story was similar classic narcissism, full on addiction to drama. At first some of the things she threw fits about were reasonable. They were difficult situations, and I thought I get why she is upset. But then the drama continued, and it became clear that what she got off on was the drama. Her fights would just get more and more emotionally abusive, and the things she said to me just crueler and meaner. Because getting a rise out of me fed her need for drama. If this sounds like your situation, bone up on the concept of narcissistic fuel point anyway. The moment that woke me up was when she went on a walk with me. Walking together had been regarded as sacrosanct shared activity. And she screamed demeaning things at me for basically an entire hour, with no regard for the entire neighborhood hearing all about how ineffective my business was, and how insecure I was about having been fired, and having work challenges. I know it's incredible, but that tirade of verbal abuse was not what woke me up. It was what she said to me at the end of the whole things, when we were in let's make up now time. That is when you say I'm sorry point. Instead she said I'm sorry that was necessary. Then I realized that she was not blowing off steam or venting. This was her plan on how to manage the relationship with me. It took about 2 minutes of that rolling around in my head to realize. Fuck this, I'm out. Point executed. Split a few months after that. Happily divorced since then. We had a 6-month trial separation. Grand advice she got from her twice divorced and happily married cunt of a colleague. Point I had signed a 6-month lease, but kindly had it extended for 2 months. In December, I was a wreck and waited for her call daily to move back in together. She called and said maybe, let me see how it works out with dude she's seeing first. Still, thinking I should be patient with my wife, I accept and say I really must know by February 17th, because I'll need a new place to stay. She said no problem, we can talk then. Point my life, future, hopes, and dreams hang in the balance. I wait for her call, it doesn't come. February 20th I call and ask why she hasn't called, and she says I said that. I don't even remember that. Well, I'm still not sure what's up with dude. So I'm not sure. She was the most important thing in the world to me. I stuck with her through a lot of bullshit I shouldn't have, but oh well, and I wasn't even on her radar. I moved into a sweet bachelor pad on the beach. A few days later I woke up and remember looking myself in the mirror and saying you don't need her. You'll be just fine. It was like the weight of the world was lifted off my chest. I could breathe and think clearly. It was over. A few more years were shed, mostly over what never would be on my part. On her part eventually there was regret and even begging for forgiveness and another shot. It cannot be unbroken, and she had broken it thoroughly. Point. That was almost 3 years ago. I've fallen madly in love, gotten remarried, have a beautiful daughter, and consider myself the luckiest guy I know. I'm so glad she did what she did. It got me here. Once she got a new job, she started talking to me about this guy at work in increasing frequencies. She started getting more and more distant. One night she didn't come home. I got worried, so I checked her messages to make sure she wasn't out with that guy. According to the text messages, they went to a club and had sex in the bathroom. I confronted her about the texts the next day when she got home, and she said that her new boss advised her to make up the text chain to a fake friend to get back at me for not being happy in the marriage. I told her she was full of shit and gave her my ring, and that she had 30 days to move out. The next day she signs a lease and moves out. I go to drop off my daughter the morning after, and the same guy is sleeping in her bed. I confront her about it, and she said he came over early to help her move. A week passes, and I urge her to come back for the sake of our 1-year-old child. She declines because he has moved in, and she can't kick him out, and because I called her a bitch. The next week I find out she's pregnant with the guy's child, and that they have gotten engaged. We hadn't even filed the divorce paperwork at the time, and she had only known this dude for a little over a month. We pushed the divorce paperwork through. Fast forward to the present. 5 months later, once the divorce is finalized, and she said she's sorry, it was a huge mistake, and she still loves me. She's still pregnant from the affair, How could I ever have anything but resentment for that child once she gives birth? And yet, a small part of me still wishes we could be family again. FML. Different story here. After 8 years of marriage I moved cross country for a new job after we had decided that the family would move, but she later changed her mind and I went anyway thinking she was just having cold feet. She FedExed me a Dear John letter and divorce papers 5 weeks later, signed on Valentine's Day, and delivered on my birthday. After a few months of arguments and discussion I quit my job, moved back close to home, found another job paying half what I was making, and found out she had a new boyfriend, and I had a short-lived rebound girlfriend myself. I chased her for 18 months, prolonging our divorce proceedings thinking she would come to her senses, trying to convince her she still loved me. I could see it in her eyes on the rare occasion she would actually look directly at me. It was a bitter and ugly separation, though, financially and emotionally. On our final court date neither she nor her attorney showed up. I said fuck it, and went through with the divorce anyway, even though I could have continued it again. 3 years later, at our son's baseball game, we sat next to each other and talked for the first time in years. Turns out she was over her boyfriend, who happened to be a close family friend whose wife had died suddenly a few years before, and our kids were the same age, but he was a pretentious prick and everyone knew it. I moved back home 2 months later. We would walk into restaurants and the servers would actually say to her in front of me, "I'm so glad you're not with that asshole anymore." She later told me that she didn't go to court that day because if she looked me in the eye she and I would both know that she still loved me and she wouldn't be able to go through with it. We have been back together and unmarried for 5 years now. I hope my backwards perspective can help someone in a similar situation. I know I'm late to the party, but I'll drop mine here for sheets and giggles. Also, not truly a divorce. I was engaged, but broke it off near last minute. Because of her we had dated for like 4 years. In our 5th year I asked her to marry me. I knew she had her crazy moments, but I figured fuck it, we are all broken in some way, I'll just love her through her crazy. Fast forward about 2 months, after I asked her to marry me, I was at the office and she texted me. I didn't reply to her because I was on a secure floor, meaning employees aren't supposed to have cell phones in the room because of sensitive data. She knows about this policy mind you, and she knows we had lockers we are supposed to keep ourselves in point anyways. I got to work late that day and forgot to store my phone. When I felt my phone vibrate I took a quick peek. I figured I would text her after work and put my phone on silent so I didn't get sheet canned for breaking a term on site policy. At the end of the day I pulled out my phone to text her I was getting off and I would call her soon, but I had like 10 messages from her. I started reading the hate mail she had texted me and I was blown away. It covered the gambit ranging from "you're an asshole, why are you ignoring me" to the extreme of "I hope you die and go to hell, you piece of shit" all the way up to the last message that said "you know, you're a nice guy and all, but I think we're done." I turned my phone off, thought about what I just read, how I had tried to treat her like royalty whenever I possibly could, and the fact I had never spoken ill of her to her face or behind her back. After a bit of driving home, she called and I answered. She didn't call to apologize, but to see if I would answer, and then wanted to play the whole thing off like she was just mad because I wasn't talking to her. It all just hit me. If I married her I would spend however many years of my life trying to please her, only to have some random day set her off the deep end and I would be sleeping on the couch, or divorced. Halfway though one of her sentences I just said, "Sally, you're right, we're through," and I hung up on her. I didn't take any of her calls after that, and I ended up changing my number later that day because she kept calling me. I've never been married, but I want to give a shout out of support to people who found themselves trapped in awful relationships with their ex-spouses and look back and wonder how they could have let things get so bad. It's okay, it's not your fault. Human relationships are complicated and difficult and lots of people out there are just straight up toxic. I spent about a year in a relationship with a woman who was a nasty, mean, short-tempered, manipulative, verbally abusive, arrogant bully. I remember not long before the end, she had so effectively demolished any trace of my self-worth and self-confidence that I remember thinking, welp, I'm gonna end up marrying this woman. She's the best I deserve and will ever get. I guess this will just be my life now. I broke up by essentially ghosting because anytime I tried to talk it out she ended up finding exactly where my weak points were and managed to manipulate me into staying, under the assumption that it was all my fault, of course. Eventually I finally thought to myself, why would anyone who openly says I'm a profoundly faked up person who's incapable of making anyone happy, and then later pretends that she never said it, and I'm making it up to start a fight, actually want me around? When that clicked, we were in the middle of another fight. I just left, drove away, went home, got drunk, and didn't answer any more calls or texts. End of point. The scary part, and the reason I sympathize with people who have dealt or continue to deal with abusive relationships, is that all of this felt completely normal while it was happening. Not a marriage, but a long distance. You're already sneering, and you should. I was young and dumb. Engagement point. For 2 years I overlooked her needing to get high several times a day, to where I asked if she could refrain from toking on Christmas en route to my parents' house, and she stopped talking to me until we were there. Her letting me know after several lies about her background that her father was in prison for killing her mother because he found her with another man, whom he also killed. Her childish refusal to discuss any topic she either found uncomfortable or where she had behaved poorly. Now, for some reason, I was going to accept all of that and move 400 miles in with her. As we packed up my stuff and put it in the rental van, she had a meltdown and said she'd never speak to me again and drove off in her car, leaving me on the sidewalk with all my stuff and literally nowhere to go. Called an hour later. I'm sorry, can we make up? No. What do you mean? No, I mean get the fuck out of my life. You're a faking cancer. Edit. Someone downvoted this. Lulz. FWIW. She's in prison now. Drug trafficking, and not her first or second time since our stubborn middle class domesticity 20 years ago. Literally has a PhD and a drug habit that won't quit. We were living in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment. It wasn't big at all, but we'd been poor for a while. We were doing better, but we were still there riding out the lease and saving a house down payment. Then, we got sick. Bad, horrible flu, both of us. For a week, maybe. It was the kind of sick where after a couple of days you're no longer aware of how long you've actually been sick. For the two of us in a tiny showbox, this was a nightmare. We were getting on each other's nerves. For the first time, I think. There was a little bit of mild snapping at each other, which was not something we'd done before. Coming out of the fog of sickness, though, we'd run out of edible or easily cookable food, and we lived in the middle of nowhere, when food delivery services didn't exist. I'd just barely regained enough strength to, in my probably incorrect opinion, safely drive to the store, hobble around using the shopping cart for support, and get some basic supplies, hopefully some pre-made stuff, so we can eat kind of healthy as we regain strength. So I volunteered. I told her, look, I think I can do this without passing out. I just need you to throw out some of the bad food from the tiny fridge, so I can put it all in there when I get back. So I went, and it was worse than I thought. I hallucinated for a while in the frozen goods aisle. But I made it home, and you'll be completely unsurprised to hear that she hadn't made space for the new food. She'd gone ahead and dialed up the prehistoric internet and was in a chat room or something. I didn't snap. I didn't argue. I just sighed, cleared out the fridge, put the new stuff away, and went to bed to pass out without eating. And as I drifted off I just knew that we no longer had a future together. Edit. See my reply lower down. This wasn't why did you divorce her. This was just the moment that I knew, or the moment that I knew that I had already known. When I graduated from college, I was lost. I had no idea what I was going to do with my future. I was struggling for money, working temp jobs I hated. The real world was laughing at me. After some creative googling I stumbled upon the opportunity to teach English in Japan. It was a crazy idea, but just crazy enough to work. I'd barely ever left the US and maybe a nice culture shock to the system was what I needed. I spent one glorious year there. I wouldn't say I gained a lot of valuable work skills, but I did manage to learn a ton about myself and what I'm capable of. It was a definitive year for me, and I came back a person changed for the better. Fast forward 10 plus years and I have a very successful career, a house, and a wife. On a work trip overseas I was informed that I'd be needed at my company's Japan office for a week. I was ecstatic. I hadn't been back to Japan in so long. When I got back to the States I told her about this great opportunity and that I couldn't wait for her to come with me so I could show her the town where I worked and meet my friends with whom I still keep in contact. The town that, in a very large way, shaped me into the man she married. Her response? She sighed, slumped her shoulders and said, "Can't you just go with your father?" I was devastated. She knew how much Japan meant to me, but couldn't be bothered. In that moment, and considering other previous disappointments too, I realized that the memories I'd want to have with my spouse, I'd never have with her. I had just gotten out of the hospital after an 11-day stint involving the birth of our son and 3 seizures caused by a rare medical condition. He had been approved for a month's worth of paternity leave and used it all playing video games. If I asked him to stay with our son, he got angry. He lost his job soon after because he refused to go back to work after his paternity leave ended. But the final nail in the coffin came a few months later. We had gone to marriage counseling, we'd tried living apart, and from the very moment I went into labor until this point, he had insisted that our tax money never came in. My mother was supporting our child, I was recovering from major surgery. He hadn't bought a single package of diapers. I logged into the tax website to see our status on our taxes, only to see that we had received nearly $7,000 during the first few days of my hospital visit. He had bought a brand new guitar. Everything else is a mystery. I have no idea where the money went. When I confronted him, he lost it, said the money was his and never mine, and that it wasn't my business where it had gone. My mother watched our son that night. I packed my things and left, still saving up for a proper divorce. Neither me or my son have seen him in 3.5 years. My boy is my boy, and I won't divorce that waste of a man until I get to keep the only good thing he ever gave me. After 18 years of marriage, my alcoholic wife was carrying on an affair. By that point she was drinking so heavily that she was sloshed whenever she wasn't at work, and I would no longer drink with her. So, she found someone else to drink with, among other activities. When I confronted her with the evidence, letters from him that she had kept, pictures of the two of them, etc., she pleaded guilty and blamed it on the booze and went into rehab. We had 3 kids, so I felt compelled to give her a chance. And I gave her lover an ultimatum: stay away from my alcoholic wife or I would tell all to his wife. When he reneged on the deal, I walked up to his front door and gave his wife the letters he had written my wife. From the look on her face I know I broke her heart, but a deal is a deal. In the months after my wife left rehab I began to see the same behavior which had alarmed me before, more secretive, unplanned late work hours, etc. So I cracked her email accounts, back before this was illegal, found that she had started another affair with her addictions counselor, and promptly told her I wanted a divorce. Most shameful behavior was at the end of this conversation she proceeded to strip down to change, clearly hoping that I would be overcome by lust and make up. That validated my decision, as if it needed confirmation. After the divorce was final I had him fired and placed on a list of sanctioned health professionals, thus barring him from ever practicing again. I got the kids and kept the house. She had to pay child support. Still going through the divorce right now, but I still remember the moment that triggered it. Things had been bad for a while, with me feeling like more of a support system for her than a person. I was working late on an install that was going south. It was a problem I couldn't fix, and I was being passed around by no fewer than 4 help desks, each blaming the other. While I'm doing this, on my work phone, my Bluetooth keeps ringing in my ear from my wife calling. I silence it and keep going. This is a somewhat common occurrence when I'm making important work calls. After 2 or 3 of those calls in a short period of time, I send her a text asking her what's going on, afraid there's some emergency at home. Instead, Her reply is a passive aggressive comment on how she just wanted me to know she was thinking of me, which I've now come to realize means I need some attention right this minute, and I'm going to get mad at you if you don't provide it, no matter what you're doing. And that was it from her. No wondering how I was doing, or how things were going, since I was stuck out that late making the money for her to spend. Just anger that I wouldn't drop everything I was doing to answer her call. Point I get as far as I can go, still don't have the job done, and I'm going to have to come back the next day to do the help desk mess all over again in the hopes someone can help me. I get home really late and she's gone. Left the kids in their beds and went off to who knows where, and I don't even know if she's coming back. At this point I realize I don't know if I want her to. This has happened far too many times. Her expecting me to be there whenever she needs, but refuses to ever be there when I need it. That is when the relationship died. She was back at some point before morning. I still don't know where she was or who she was with, but that was the point I decided I wasn't going to put any more effort into the relationship if she wasn't going to. My ex-wife of 7 years cheated on me. I want to speak in her defense. We loved each other when we got married, and when our son was born. I loved her as well as I knew how, but that wasn't very well. I'll admit, I didn't do anything wrong, but I didn't do very much right either. We just weren't compatible. We got married too quickly. We got married mostly because she was pregnant. I don't blame her for wanting out of the marriage. I don't blame her for wanting to find someone else. I didn't deserve to be cheated on. No one ever does, because divorce and leaving without cheating is always an option. She's not a bad person. I had no idea it was happening. I never suspected a thing. She's not a bad person. She just did a bad thing. I don't hate her for what she did. I understand that she did it for herself, not against me. I wasn't ever supposed to know she planned on leaving me without telling me. I'll say that last part again. She didn't do it to hurt me. She did it to help herself. I wasn't involved in her relationship with him, and my relationship with her wasn't fulfilling for either of us. I could choose to be hurt and point my finger at her and hate her for what she did, but I don't, because she didn't do it to me. She did it for herself. She was selfish, and she did a bad thing, but she's not a bad person. I'm glad we're divorced. I'm glad she's gone. We are both much happier now. Was not married, but had been in a relationship for 4 years, and planning to get married with a girl. And it was not so much a snap moment as the idea slowly growing on me for 4 months. I was very young when we started dating, around 15, so of course, as all kids do, I thought it was the relationship of a lifetime. Problem was, she was a possessive freak. How possessive, you ask? The kind that asks you call her on Skype when you're at a friend's house. The kind that would throw a fit if I told her I'd go see my friends. Not to mention the frequent suicide threat if something displeased her greatly. This kind of possessive. However, having never been any good with girls, this being my first, let's say, official girlfriend, I stayed with her for very long. It goes even deeper than that though. She was from a very poor family with a drunkard father, so when I realized that, around 6 months in, I basically invested in pulling her out of misery. Then, my mother got in on it and decided to help her and pay for a rent away from that sheet family of hers and for an education. Now imagine, teenage bully, fake name, but that's me, caught in something like that. I grew some very strange, extremely solid bonds with her. The kind of bonds that look more like a fish trap than bonds really. But nevertheless, I carried onwards. Why? Because teenager. It got to a point where I felt kinda trapped with her, not really in love anymore. Sometimes I would ponder leaving her, but then get it out of my head forcibly, saying no, you love her, and if you leave she's in deep troubles, she will lose her sustenance. On her side the grasp had grown tighter. She wanted all my passwords, all my phone codes. She had invaded me. So I started making sock accounts, lying to her saying I didn't have Twitter. I was living a life of lies to gain some freedom. She had met my mother, the sweetest person alive. She is my mother. So of course my mother began treating her like her own daughter pretty much, and as my ex-girlfriend had a clear lack of affection, they went along very well. I on my side grew attached to her small siblings, helping them out of this hellhole of a family they had, playing with the 6-year-old. Our families were now linked. Imagine the situation. Billy, that's still me. Billy is 18 years old. He is in love with a woman that he has helped out of misery. She on her side is kind, just a tad bit possessive, like nothing really. Just invaded Billy's whole life so much so that he hides for freedom. Lies frequently to escape with friends or even just to watch a few videos on YouTube instead of talking to her constantly. Billy lives in fear of getting caught leaving a comment somewhere on the internet, in fear she will find it and throw a fit of rage that will of course lead her to threats of suicide. Billy also loves her brother like his own brother, and Billy's mom consider the girlfriend like her own daughter. How faked is Billy's life right now? Here comes the end of the year. Billy leaves high school for an IT school. The IT school is super intensive, so Billy uses this excuse to catch a break from the girlfriend, even though he still struggles to see her at night on Skype for 1 hour or 2, for she insists on it. 3.5 years in, it's Christmas. Billy barely even has time to visit his family, taken by the amount of work he has. He now has huge bags under his eyes. His life hygiene is pathetic. He's taken on some huge weight. The freshman's 15 kilograms have been more like 35 for him. As per usual, he decided to lie his way into catching a break. For New Year he tells his girlfriend he's very sick. He won't be able to speak. You guessed it, he's seeing a friend. Said friend has his birthday around the new year, so it's a party, my dudes. A geek party, mind you. More entertainment systems and beers than human limbs in the room, and above 50% sweat per volume of oxygen. So what's wrong with a good party, you ask? Well, Billy hadn't guessed who'd be there. An old friend that now lives far. A she friend from high school. Oh yes, you know what stupid things Billy was going to do. The evening started great. Billy went to wake up the aforementioned friend who arrived early and was extremely tired from traveling a long way to this party. He sat on the bed, leaned over the sleeping body and said, "Do you have time for a friend?" while lightly tapping on her shoulder. The lady barely moved her sleepless eyes and answers, "Just a little longer," to which the nerd that Billy is answered, "And what about very old friends?" Yes, Billy is a huge LOTR nerd. To these words the two arms of the sleeping lady clenched around him tight to the resounding cries of Billy. The evening was off to a good start. And so a few hours later the party started, beers went down, and League of Legends 5v5 ranked games were played in Troll Meter. Good times. Later that night everybody went to sleep in designated rooms, around 3 AM. Billy and Nova, let's call her that, being guys and girls, were of course separated. The house was huge, and we were specifically told not to make a mess or do immoral things. So of course you guessed it, Billy, who had spent the entire evening stroking Nova's feet with his own, sneaked up in her room, went in the bed, and well, you can guess what happened when the Kigurumi-clad woman pulled him against her chest, bare-breasted herself to, I quote, translated, "get more warmth." Intense, thrilling, semi-drunk, emotionally satisfying, sweaty, barely adult sex. A wonderful moment as I recall it, despite the utter immorality of the act. So Billy had tasted the forbidden fruit, he had cheated, he has recovered part of his liberty by being a horny as whole. What's the next logical step, you ask? 4 years in, proposal. Yes, proposal to get married to the girl he cheated on. Great faking idea, Billy. More like this please. So yeah, proposal and all. Very long story short, Billy understood for months later that this was a poor attempt at making a broken relationship work. He came clean, told everything and left despite the girlfriend's cries asking him to stay, the photo of blood and whatnot. Billy, though in his hole, had finally become strong, had finally stopped being such a goddamn coward. He helped his now ex and kept an eye on her for a time to be sure she was able to move on and wouldn't pull off some real self-harm. Now Billy's got a new girlfriend, all new, that he met in college. She's an absolute diamond and not a control freak. They share interests and she knows all about Billy's past, but Billy still gets to have his privacy. Billy has grown. Even though he was an asshole, he got his dick under control now, and he's damn happy because the one he's with is totally worth it. And finally Billy knows what simple happiness means. He and his family haven't stopped helping his ex. Though damn what a right. Edit. Jesus faking Christ, did I have things to get off my chest? Doubt anyone will read though. Nothing interesting in here. Not a divorce, but the moment when I decided that I didn't want a relationship with my high school sweetheart anymore. We were together for 7 years, and after 1 year apart we started going out again. She told me everything you want to hear coming out of the mouth of your loved one. She even said she wanted to start a family with me, and I was over the clouds about it. But before we did anything she needed to be done with her last school year abroad. No problem, right? I could wait, we would have a life together. Just before she left she asked me to please take care of her house, since her parents were going to visit her. I did. Spent the first week watering plants and getting out, but one day I got thirsty and went to her kitchen for a glass of water. You know what I found? A couple of mugs with a heart, her name and a man's name, not mine of course. My heart just stopped right there. Automatically I climbed the stairs to her bedroom and found a picture of her on a wedding dress, a man whom I hadn't ever seen before at her side and her parents smiling happily, while fabulous Las Vegas looked at me from the background. The faker got married. Even if it was a fake Vegas wedding she forgot to mention this detail to me. As if on clue she texted me, and on marriage I just told her never to contact me again, blocked her number, and left her house. Keys were dropped on her mailbox. I have never told anyone this. It feels good to let it out. So, this just happened, but was a long time coming. Most all of this is technically my fault as I had my eyes fixed on my career. That said, wife and I just got in a fight. She decides to take a stand. Counselor, her dad, with whom she has a very odd relationship, suggests she have me write a list of all of the things I hate about her. God grant me the power to get this divorce. Please do not allow me to worry about alimony and child support, but instead just get on the path to our divorce. It was writing that list that I realized, what the fuck am I doing here? How did I let this happen to me? Cheated on my physically once. Cheated on my via phone sex and text multiple times. Here is the list in short order. You hate my parents. You give them no credit for them giving us anything. They gave us the down payment on our first house. You have told me on several occasions how manipulative. He lied to her about something he said to me, but she tells me I'm lying. I pay for your dad's mistakes. While you were growing up. Your brothers are losers, yet I put up with them on your behalf. You constantly talk shit about your dad, and yet as the one you're going to for help. Your brother let you get wrapped, yet when the chips were down, you chose him over me. Your dad knows you were wrapped. Your older brother put you in a faked up position, ignores it, still loves your brother more than you. And yet has the one you trust over your own husband. You cheated on me with random dude, Jason. You had phone sex and tried to make plans with Jard, a hio douche. You started talking with Phoenix douchebag. Vegas guy, / you started making plans with douchebag from title boxing. I cannot give you an orgasm, supposedly, but who the fuck knows? You make plans to do things, like Thatch of a BJ. Then it doesn't happen. All in the same night. You agreed to give blue jobs. Now somehow they are sick. You used to swallow. You say I disgust you. Yet you come on to me. You have no issue lying to me. You did coke multiple times. Didn't tell me about it. You made me question the paternity of my children. You gave me in standard. You made it so I had to get checked for STDs. You made me look at your STDs. You think that I prefer you while drinking. She gave up drinking after her DUI. I lived with that cheat show and still loved and supported you. You hated me for all of the things that made me successful. You have no issues with them when it benefits you, but it makes you lonely and you fuck other people. Because of that loneliness you think I prefer BJs to sex. You don't know shit about how I feel on the subject. You just assign a feeling and don't give a damn what I really think. You think I'm going to screw you during our divorce, but it is all determined by law. You think I was scared for you to go back to work. Ha. I wished you would have gotten a real job. When you want something, you get. You have no problem spending money, but don't at all respect what it takes to make it. You used to, but you lost that ability. You have an aversion to work. No matter where you work, it sucks and you're too good for it. I have tried to give you ample opportunities to get tooled up for a new job, but you constantly chose not to. A former job at a shoe store gives you nightmares. You need out of validation. You hate me, yet I have stood by you through anything and everything. You'd prefer me dead / you're pulling this bullshit, and it is the likely cause of my first divorce. This turned out much longer than I had planned. And in comparison to others this sure doesn't seem that bad, but figured it might be therapeutic for me to share. Point separation started after she walked downstairs with her bags packed while I was doing laundry and ironing, after a morning of cleaning the house while she slept. The night before had been a Halloween party and all seemed well, but apparently not. Fast forward a few months, and it comes out that she wanted to relive her younger years that I stole from her. I had done nothing but support everything she had ever tried, 7 jobs while we were together, or wanted, MBA program, and in return, I got left alone. I had given things up to try and fix our relationship, but she just took on more to not have to be around. I eventually found out from a mutual friend that she had slept with one of my best friends while she was a flight attendant based out of a location 3.5 hours away, when ignoring me whenever she was home. I confronted her about it and said was able to move past it if she would work on things, including therapy, not just doing what she wants, doing things together, trying to make things more equitable. She moved back in, and after a couple of weeks, she declined to attend an engagement party for some very good friends so that she could finish unpacking. When I got home, she still wasn't unpacked. It was sitting on the couch texting someone. Finally, the last straw. After she went to bed, I did what I shouldn't have and looked at her phone. Texts were with some guy talking about the date they had and discussing getting together in the future. Goodbye. Turned out to be the best decision I could have made. Happily remarried now with a beautiful 3-year-old. I realize I'm pretty late to this, but I decided to make an account to share this. High school sweetheart and I were going to college on opposite sides of the US. Cool. Love beats all odds that the long distance relationship would flop. Right. Things go fairly well until our 3rd year, when I get a Skype call 2 months after she went back after winter break. She's pregnant. She's terrified. I do the only thing that I can think of and fly out immediately and ask her to marry me. She says yes. Things start to get normal again. I leave school to search for a job in her college city so at least one of us can finish our degree while the other supports the soon to be family. 1 month later I meet good friend Jim. Seems nice. They've been best friends since day one, and it's kind of curious that I never met him till now. Turns out they've been faking. Cool. I ask if the baby is mine. She doesn't know. Jim seems well off, better looking, better whatever else you can think of, so I decide to leave and move in with my parents to figure things out. 1 month later she moves home and tells me that she loves me and she was sorry about the whole Jim thing. Turns out Jim was abusive. I decide that I don't care if it's my kid. I loved her enough to want to make it work. 1 month later summer hits and she hates being pregnant and would rather have fun and go on adventures, and that she's too young to be making such a big decision. She gets an abortion. Jim takes her to France. I still haven't heard from her in 2 years. I couldn't begin to describe how devastated I was. I'd faked up my life for someone who'd used me. Cool. I mean, I get that I'm worthless, but damn that cut deep. To be fair, we weren't married, but I felt we were. Stupid mistake. For me, the moment I knew I couldn't forgive her was when she came home after being gone for a few days. I thought she was at her parents and packed for the trip. She told me about the abortion and I cried over the son/daughter that had died, while she calmly packed for a vacation and left without saying goodbye. This is long, but divorce reasons are complex. Sexless for many months. Total cold shoulder for no known specific reasons. I was to blame for everything that went wrong. I could do no right in her eyes. We had been in marriage counseling for over a year. We both knew we were drifting apart. I took my son on a long vacation to my mom's, and on the phone she told me we need to go back to being friends. I asked if she knew that meant taking apart our household and marriage. She said yes. Came back and told her okay, I agree. She was shocked, said she only told me that because she thought it would make me desperate to stay with her and kiss her ass. Over the next couple months nothing changed. I started looking for a place in town so I could move out. Was really unsure and just about to let a deposit go so we could try and make it work again. She called me out of the blue and screamed insults at me, blaming me for a blatant bank error. So I turned around, signed the lease, went home and told her to kiss my ass. I left everything behind except my clothing, my DJ gear, and my work computer. Now happily married to a beautiful angel, a compatible companion with genuine shared interests who values me and my son for exactly who we are. Met my angel within a month of moving away from my ex, and we have endured 3 years of long distance. She was in med school, and 4 more living together with our whole lives to go. My ex and I are friendly, our families have meals together regularly, and we are both very flexible on parenting issues and custody. We are a strong team and our son is our mission of love. I guess she got what she claimed wanted in the end. I haven't talked to anyone about this since it happened. I was married almost 4 years when that happened to me this past November. Drunk wife finally got a job out of the house in July, in Shitty Town TX, and even found some friends. One she thought was great, he was funny and nice, and I'd love him. I want to explain that she has a very real friend that I will call Tina for now, and in the 3 months following July the two had spent an extraordinary amount of time together and texting. And the wife had been working incredibly long hours, to include every single weekend for 10 hours a day. Not much for some, but this was a very big step from where she was. Anyway, I love this woman desperately, and even though she is still drunk by the time she makes it home from work, at least she is going. Here we are, late October, it's around 10 PM and the wife has been passed out since 6:30, and I'm looking for some stupid sheet that I left in our car. I don't know what it was. Just like a movie, her iPad lit up as I was sitting in the seat digging. I glance at it, since it's sitting on the ground next to the bag I was digging through, and see a list of messages from Tina, and one message from Tina last name. I probably wouldn't have thought anything about it had the last visible message on the lock screen from Tina being "Good night beautiful, I'll see you tomorrow." The next day was Saturday, and I know Tina doesn't work at my wife's work on Saturday, which is where my wife will be tomorrow on Saturday. So I cracked open the iPad and there they were in all their glory, the very first messages that led to me discovering what I thought was never possible, not to me anyway. I couldn't help myself, and invasion of privacy, or what have you, I don't care. I read through every message from Tina, and the similarly worded messages from her super cool friend from work, that I could find. Turns out they are the same person, and it's not Tina. Months of lies and me catching her over and over, and begging and yada yada yada, and my divorce will be final beginning of July. Through all the abuse, the manipulation, the lying, cheating and the theft, I never once considered it. Maybe I was too weak. Maybe I was broken down so much. I don't really know. I just never considered it at all. We tried a break where she alternated between cheating on me and stalking me. We tried counseling, where she continuously lied and exaggerated to the therapist. We even tried the church, but it had no real effect. Still, I would have stayed. We had kids, and she loved me, right? But then I lost my job. Admittedly, the early days of our relationship were tough. I was young, and I hadn't quite figured out my future yet, so I spent some time bouncing between jobs. Hard when you have a kid together, I know. But I had been at the same place for 3 years now. I had provided for my family for 3 years. We had thrived. I had been able to support her habits. The credit card she didn't know I knew about. The new car she just had to have. The expensive clothes and electronics and the kids' toys we just didn't need. The girls' lunches, where she would treat all of her friends to lavish restaurants. But now I'm out of work, because my company decided to close my plant. Nothing to do with me, we were all out of work. They only gave is a day's notice. Point I came home to an attack. Yelling, screaming, insults. I'm a horrible father. I'm a shitty husband. I never loved my kids. I don't take care of them. What good am I? It had never hurt this much before. Maybe I was feeling extra sensitive. Maybe it had just built for too long. Maybe I'm just an asshole. I don't know, but when she started hitting me I lost control. I started to yell, to fight back. I raged at her for what could have been minutes. Hoping to stop me, to scare me into submission, she hit me. I hit her back. All the frustrations, all the hurt, The years of suppressing everything came out in that slap point. It couldn't have been too hard. There was no bruise, but she suddenly stopped, and I suddenly realized that if someone could push me that far, someone could drive me to violence. There was no saving the relationship. I had to leave. I went upstairs, packed a bag, and did just that. A year and 2 days later we were divorced. Well, about 6 years after we were married, I noticed a lot of texts from a clearly made up name on her phone. Every time I asked who it was, I was told, oh, a friend from work. She accidentally left her email open one day and I saw an email pop up from an ex-boyfriend. So I did the proper thing and read it. They were making plans to meet up. I then searched all her sent messages and there were hundreds of emails setting up rendezvous. I confronted her, and she finally admitted that she had slept with him once after we had been married about a year, but that was it. I guess she was convincing enough at the time. Either that or I just talked myself into making it work due to our daughter. Fast forward about 2 years, and we find out she is pregnant. I'm ecstatic, and she is devastated. I didn't realize until later that it was because she thought it was his kid. Before we went to the hospital, I had decided that if it came out biracial, I would get up and walk out of the delivery room and leave her to it. Yes. The other guy was black. No, I'm not racist. Luckily that did not happen, and I ended up with a wonderful son. However, 3 years later, through many different ways including phone tracking, GPS locating and emails, I realized she was not only still meeting up with him, but several other men as well. I should have had a better clue when her nether regions started to smell off. It all worked out. We split everything 50/50. I have the kids 5 days a week, and she will be moving out of state soon and leaving the kids with me. I have a fantastic new lady that is excellent to me and my kiddos. The actual moment. After we had been in marriage counseling for 6 months, and during one session I expressed my need for such and physical intimacy, and was told that she had no intention of making that happen. Background: she claims to be very religious and wanted to wait until marriage. We did have sex before marriage but very infrequently. I thought once we got married the taboo of premarital sex would be gone, and we would have sex more frequently. In premarital counseling, sex was the #1 thing on my list of things I needed from a partner. Well, we got married and only had sex once every 6 to 8 weeks. Finally she said she wasn't happy and moved out. Started sexting and hanging out with a coworker and then lying about it. During the 6 months in marital counseling she thought nothing was her fault and all of our sessions were focused on what I needed to improve on, since I was the only one willing to try and fix things. Finally after 6 months I realized that I has done about all I could without some reciprocal help from her. And I finally expressed what I needed from here to be happy in the marriage and she wasn't willing to do that. Biggest thing for me was probably going to individual counseling sessions in addition to marriage counseling sessions. It helped me realize that I was really unhappy with my then wife and marriage, and that I was actually really hurt by her lack of effort and commitment. When I just got tired of the wall of things constantly demanding that I keep pushing back. She has bipolar depression and manages it pretty well, but in the first 2 years of our relationship, she went to the hospital twice. Having never dealt with mental issues before, I told myself that that was a shitty reason to divorce someone. So I didn't. I educated myself and redoubled my efforts to help her. Once she got stable, I told her I wanted to pay off our debt, but she kept having bad days and the only solution to make her feel better was to take her out to dinner. 1 month we spent over $1,000 going to restaurants regularly. We spent 1/3 of our income on restaurants. We're already paying rent and $900 per month on student loans. She was fine hitting the overdraft on our bank accounts and didn't see how it mattered. Now she's pissed at me because I didn't agree to us buying a house with mold and a cracked foundation, and I encouraged her to give up her Jeep because the payments were $400 a month. I haven't felt secure or happy for such a long time. I've been a caretaker every day of our marriage. She gained so much weight, and although she loved me unconditionally with all her heart, I just didn't have anything left to give. We only get one life here. I saw myself 50 years down the road, just a husk of man, resenting someone who loved me, but didn't share the load in the relationship. My damsel in distress couldn't be rescued, and she was pulling me into her distress every day. I feel so lost and dead some days. I can't wait for me to come back. We just started the divorce process, but I want it to be done and over with. Right now she's told me she's working on maximuming out the alimony she can get. I'm so tired. I just want it to be over. Actually, she's the one who asked for a divorce, but there was a moment I realized it was all over, and no, it wasn't the moment she asked for a divorce. Fuck it, it's a long story, but I'll tell for someone who may get something from it. We dated for 5 years without me ever really growing as a human being. I asked her to marry me, thinking it was the next logical step in our relationship. For a year I was a pretty terrible husband, basically treating our marriage the same way I treated our dating relationship, except that we lived together. Everything started crumbling after our first anniversary. I had been teaching for 5 years and saving money in anticipation of pursuing a pipe dream career. I had pretty much a year's salary put away to supplement her income for the year, and she said she was okay with the idea of me taking a year off from teaching. But soon after, it became apparent that me not having a job really bothered her. So I took up a part-time job. Still, I noticed her pulling away emotionally and physically, and we started going to counseling in February. By May, she asked for a divorce, although I was pretty hard in denial and convinced her to continue with counseling. I applied for another teaching job the following fall to show her that I was going to provide again. Mid-May, she announced she'd be moving out. Trying to be a good husband, I told her to take some time by herself, to think things through, and I would support her during her time away. But I told her she had to make up her mind by the time school started in the fall, because I couldn't start a new job in a new place with something like this hanging over my head. Fast forward past the worst summer of my life. School starts in the fall, and she says she is once back into our marriage. I'm thrilled. I think I'm going to have my life back. My wife and I are going to rebuild our marriage. But every time I ask her to start moving back into our house, she wants to do anything else. Go to the movies, go to the mall, paint pottery, not joking, and that was the moment. The moment I realized this girl has no intention of moving back in with me and trying to rebuild our life. But still I told her, no, I don't want to do insert activity. I want you to move back in so we can start picking up the pieces. And then she admitted that she didn't want to move back in. And that was that. We had always fought a lot. We were going to get divorced after she lied about cheating on me before, but I got orders and wanted to try again with a fresh slate. Maybe a year went by and the fighting started again. I found out she was talking to one of my friends in the "hey, you should suck my dick when you come back home" kind of ways. We were overseas, so no small feat going home last minute. I was deployed, and we hadn't really talked in a few days. She gets a hold of me and tells me her mom is sick and she has to get home. She grabs a plane ticket and flies over. No big deal. I had another buddy email me and he told me what was up. He was there hanging out with both of them. So I get to a phone and call her mom, and she's obviously not sick at all. So I call her and ask her to tell me what's going on. She lies and tells me she's at the hospital with her mom. So I told her I knew she wasn't and that I called her mom. She hangs up the phone and we don't talk anymore until she gets back like a week later. Overall, I basically paid around $1,600 for her to go get laid, and then she spent another $3,000 on, as she puts it, clothes and sheet. I went to work, filed the paperwork to send her ass back to the States and revoke her visa, and that was that. Terrible experience. Honestly, I didn't care about the sleeping around. I assume in most relationships that it's going to happen. So I give my consent that it's no big deal. So long as a relationship wasn't affected and I absolutely wasn't lied to, it was alright. I can't deal with untrustworthy people being so closely involved in my life. Found out she was locking our 1-year-old son up in his room with no food or water for more than 24 hours at a time. She wouldn't even check on him. While pregnant with our second son, she ended up locked up in mental health care after our home was broken into. She kept saying that the people that came into the home beat and rapped her instead of an actual police investigation. The hospital blamed me for the beating and rapping. Due to the mess that created, CPS got her to sign our son away to adoption. While she was in the hospital, couldn't even find an attorney to touch that case. I managed to get in the hospital for the birth and was told that if I tried to leave the hospital with my son I would be arrested for child endangerment and other charges. There was a lot I didn't know at the time. They also kept a police presence until my son was out of the hospital. Had to keep my 1-year-old out of state with family at the time. When she finally got out of the hospital I decided to give her a second chance. A couple months later it's time to get my 1-year-old back into my house. First week she attacks my mother, then screams at our son that she isn't his mother, that she only let him be there because he is my son. Next day I catch her pushing down on his chest to change his diaper. Day after that she kicks in the front door because she thinks that we locked her out. When she went to go check the mail, she wouldn't even acknowledge her son. The entire month he would ask for her AMD, try going to her, but she would just push him away. There's picture of her looking at him like she is going to kill him. This went on for the whole month. By the end of the month I got my mom and son on an earlier flight back to my mother's house. Why did I let this go on for an entire month? Because I had installed cameras all over inside and out of my house to protect from another break-in. They ended up being used to build a case against his mother. I showed her the videos and the CPS papers my attorney was able to get, and she signed my son over to me with no issue. My family is honestly afraid that she will kill our son without realizing what she is doing. When I found out she was faking one of the kids' judo instructors after catching her sexting a year earlier, then hosting another martial artist at our house for a drink whom she was trying to fuck. She still wanted to have sex with me and wanted to live in the house. It quickly turned into random guys dropping her off in the morning, her leaving her vehicle good knows where. She would disappear for weeks at a time and ask me to leave the house when she showed up so she could spend time with the kids. She would insult me when I would go out and send threatening text messages telling me to die or that I didn't care about the kids because I would come home after being gone for 2 hours. When I did come home she would leave. She was physically abusive as well as mentally abusive. We were together for 10 years. She had been gang raped at some point when she was younger. We didn't have sex, but maybe once a month here and there as a result of her trauma. I had asked her to seek counseling for this issue here and there when we started dating, and she would either blow it off, start and stop, or say she could deal with it on her own, which she threw in my face years later, saying I never tried to help her. Years later we started having sex a lot more frequently. I started noticing that it only seemed to happen when she was intoxicated. We would have sex at least 4 or 5 times a night. When I could keep up at times, she would punish me psychologically and tell me I wasn't shit. She was happy when she got what she wanted. When she was angry she was physically abusive and manipulative. I started seeing all this as time went on. She took more pictures of herself than she ever did the kids. She has hit me with a guitar, slapped me in the face in public. I have been hit with lamps, remote controls, and had my face scratched up. All the while staying in it. Because of the kids I had enough finally when she decided she needed to have a second phone so she could have privacy, as all my passwords and phone passwords were known. I had only become suspicious when she started changing her passwords in the very beginning. Because she wanted a divorce. Because I did not want her to take 6 months off after getting her master's in clinical psychology. Because she wanted a divorce after I told her to apply to private gyms instead of 24-hour fitness when she decided to be personal trainer after taking 6 months off. When she wanted a divorce after she complained I wasn't supporting her after everyone at 24 Our Fitness didn't care she had a master's when they had a HS diploma yet did as well or better than her. That she wanted a divorce when I wasn't supportive when she quit being a personal trainer and became a receptionist at a car dealership. Then I wasn't supportive when no car salesman cared she had a master's in clinical psychology yet was able to be a receptionist. When she claimed I caused her to crash her car because she was crying too hard after I told her she needed to get a real job because $14/h wasn't worth it, and that she needed a divorce because I didn't understand her. When I realized she would counter with "I want a divorce" anytime I said something she didn't agree with. "Don't want to go to the dog beach today. I want a divorce." "Don't want to spend $800 on flying her parents out for the weekend. I want a divorce." I called her bluff and said okay. She put no effort into the relationship once we were married. She had this obsession that women need to be chased the entire time by men, so if I wasn't actively courting her and appeasing her, well then I didn't deserve her. Also, she spouted this to everyone in a relationship she knew. When I asked her why she married me, she said I was chasing her then, but then it was like I gave up after we were married a year. It was more like we were spending $1,400 on rent and she wanted to spend $800 a month on a psychologist plus all our other expenses when I was still in undergrad and she wasn't working. One of her best friends from school was a stay-at-home mom who decided she wanted to go back to school for fun. She was millionaire and bored, so she went to Rosemead at Biola just for fun. Yet she was appalled by how much my ex wanted to spend and said she herself was spending $400 a month in Long Beach for the same number of sessions. She offered to have my ex go to the same psychologist and then they would get dinner or hang out after. But my ex didn't want to drive 30 minutes to Long Beach, so we continued paying $800 and then $1,200 because the stress was causing her to need more help. So I gave up. We moved back to Minnesota and she stayed at her parents' house. Then she moved to South Carolina and took our 3 dogs with her without telling me. Good news is that I found someone new and am expecting our second boy to pop out in 50 days. I still miss my little dogs though. I'm late to the party, but a litany of reasons. Mainly she had an affair with a coworker, which, had she just admitted to it, maybe we could have worked through it. But for months she made me seem like I was crazy for suspecting something was up. I gave her space, tried talking to her, thought it was a postpartum phase thing. We had a 1-year-old, and she was never the same after she was born. Nothing worked. Finally I had to resort to snooping her text messages, which confirmed it all. Pictures and more I didn't need to see. It was finally open in the air and I called her while she was at work and told her I knew. And her first response was, "I just don't want to come home to all my clothes on the front yard." Because that was what was important, not losing me or our daughter. We thought about counseling, but when I said she needs to change jobs and cut contact, I got that's not an option. Okay, she told her friends of her affair, but made it sound like a one-time thing. They called me over to talk to me. I brought our 1-year-old with to get my side, which was so much worse. My ex got wind of it, and when I returned home I sat my daughter on the couch next to her, and she exploded yelling at me. I immediately went to pick up my daughter and started heading to the garage, and she came at me and wildly swung for my face while I held our daughter. I caught her arm with my free hand and my daughter screamed directly at her with angry eyes. I couldn't believe it. My ex froze. I released her arm and I left. Now she is married to the affair partner. All her friends are now my friends and we have joint 50/50 custody. She has actually become a much better mom in the years since the divorce, and we have made every effort to put our daughter first. We even had a trip to Disney World together, separate rooms, so we could share in our daughter's first trip there. However, every now and then she reminds me of that horrible person that lurks inside her. She didn't tell me she was bringing my daughter around the other guy, nor did she even tell me they were getting married. Every now and then she shows up to drop off pissed off about something, and I can't help but thank God I'm not on the other side of that shit show on a daily basis like the other guy now is. My daughter is well adjusted, funny, amazingly smart and beautiful. I didn't want her to grow up without her mom, so I suffer through seeing my ex twice a week at drop-offs. Can't wait till my daughter can drive or autonomous cars arrive, so I can never see my ex again, or at the very least, much more infrequently. She stole $20,000 from the family between charges to my credit card and cards she had in secret that she stuck me with after each of our 2 kids were born, because she wanted to be a SAHM, only to go back to work a month after I took loans against my 401k to support that desire. Snuck out of the bed in the middle of the night to sext/call 13 different men over the course of 3 months, including my best friend of 12y. did her best to alienate me from friends and family, encouraged me to treat myself to a selfish purchase, which I rarely, if ever did, only to use it against me in arguments, set up a threesome when we first started dating with a friend of hers that I had zero clue about till it was damn near happening, then threatened to ruin my career by telling my workplace every time she didn't get her way, was emotionally, verbally, and physically abusive, but the last straw was when I discovered she'd cheated with the live-in nanny we'd hired so she could open up her availability at work to become a manager. I had a hunch she had cheated and asked her about it. She denied it and accused me of sabotaging the relationship. She texted him how much she enjoyed the sex when I was standing next to his phone and I saw it flash across the screen. I had no more lines in the sand to draw. It's been 28 months since I left her. I found out from mutual friends there had been other men after the fact. I'm still legally separated as she's dragging the divorce out, but I have full physical custody of our kids, and every day is slightly better than the previous one. I knew so many times over, but wanted to preserve the best shot at coupling and relationships that I'd had. I overlooked so many minor and horrible things. Part of it was lack of self-esteem, part of it was pregnancy, part of it was the naivete of being faking stupid and filled with lust, and part of it was direct manipulation on her part. This is best answered as a letter I wrote to her and edited again later to be posted here. Dear soon-to-be ex-wife, we've been together for 4 years now. I first met you and your family right around the time your daughter, my soon-to-be stepdaughter, turned 4 years old at your friend's wedding, which was a night that didn't go so well. You got so drunk that you accosted the groom and ended up vomiting from alcohol poisoning. We've spent the past 4 years trying to mold to each other as best as we could. I have tried to care for your daughter as if she were my own, which has been difficult in the presence of so many obstacles, and yet I think we have made progress for which I'm grateful. I have lately come to understand perhaps your truest limits to which you will go to preserve us, and beyond which you will not go. Our communication has often been difficult, speckled with arguments, and only on rare occasions with affection. It is no secret that where we live is difficult for me due largely to commuting, the time lost to that, as well as the impact on my health and well-being. I have multiple times voiced a desire for us to move somewhere that would be much easier for me and therefore allow me more time at home with an increase in the quality of time that I'm at home. Without fail, this is never something you seriously consider doing once we'd moved to the city we lived in. And it's on that point that I'm now with more information and therefore an enhanced view of your truest feelings about me and about us. When we were first looking at apartments, you presented a series of rules that you and your ex-husband, the father of my soon-to-be stepdaughter, agreed upon about where you guys could live to make life easier for your daughter and custody logistics. Which, at the time, seemed like a fine idea, despite being extremely limiting in the areas that we could live. So many wonderful apartments were ruled out by you as either being too far from your ex-husband or too close to pollution zones or interstates. I remember at the time feeling like something was odd about the arrangement because how was anyone going to live in a major city under those strict rules? And yet, because I loved you and trusted you, I agreed to the limitations for you and for your daughter. After you ruled out a series of nice apartments that would have been much closer to work, leaving me to rule out the ugly apartments in between, we settled in the city that was close to your ex-husband and far from my work, because you didn't want to have to drive anywhere, remember? It met your rules about being close to your ex-husband, being away from major interstates, and not being in a pollution zone. Since moving to there, my quality of life has decreased significantly. I'm sick more often. I'm more tired, less healthy, more irritable, with almost no personal time to relax. I spend 2 hours a day sitting in traffic, driving a total of 25 miles per day, which is 12.5 miles per hour. During this time, I'm stuck in a car, but at least you're not driving, unable to do the things that are important to me, and unable to even tend to the chores. Even this commuting has had a very ill effect on my health because of a sharp rise in back pain and inhalation of traffic exhaust and road dust. Now, before I go any further, here's the first point that should be addressed. Right about now, you're rolling your eyes and exasperatingly sighing about all the things I'm complaining about. You don't want to hear it. Hearing it makes you angry, which in turn gives you reason to act out in anger against me in various ways. What I'd like to point out is that as your husband is telling you he's in pain, you're rolling your eyes and roiling with incredulity about how unfair this is to you, instead of hearing that your husband is in pain. After years of commuting, dealing with an increase in lung infections and sick days and asthmatic symptoms, and mounting back pain, I'll learn a few things about our city and your agreements with your ex-husband about where you guys will move, and about what your limit is for preserving us. First, after discussing with him, I'll learn that you two never had any agreements as you described them to me about where we should have moved to, not before we agreed to move in together, not while we looking for an apartment, and not after. Those agreements, which you used to rule out some great apartments, never existed. Second, the rules which you presented, had they been real, it turns out weren't even adhered to when moving to our city. Here are some things to consider. We are less than a mile from the intersection of a major interstate and a multi-lane local road. We are less than a mile from one of the largest airports in the world, and that's just the northern border on the west. We are bordered by a water reclamation plant and a power plant. To the south, we have an oil refinery and a smattering of smaller, industrial businesses, and to the east lay one of the city's largest streets. The air quality in our city scores a 1500s, with higher numbers being better. The national average is in the 90s according to your own ex-husband. Our city has a high rate of lung cancer, which can't be any surprise considering the nearby sources of pollution. This means that not only were the rules fake and then not adhered to, but where we chose to live is actually making me sicker and inflaming my asthma significantly. This is an added cost that I'm paying on a daily basis while you get to walk everywhere because driving is bad for the environment and live close to your ex-husband. Do you remember how you stood over me while I was sick and needed to go to the hospital? Do you remember that I had to beg for you to call someone, anyone, to take me to the hospital because you wouldn't? While you did eventually take me, that I had to beg at all, and do so for about 30 minutes or longer, is a very clear sign of your feelings for me, or lack thereof. That you wouldn't call a cab, or Uber for me, because you thought I was faking. And, knowing you, you still tell yourself that I was, that you magically diagnosed me with no medical knowledge or historical knowledge, and despite my begging to go get medical attention. Would you have ever treated anyone else like that? Would you ever deny anyone medical attention or access to it? God help them, if you do, because while you're pretending to know it all, someone could die. There are a few more memories to discuss that should crystallize the bizarre animosity you carry. Do you remember our fight over the blanket, or shaking the baby, or the date and subsequent presents from your ex-boyfriend which forced me to get a paternity test for our son? To be continued in comment. She found a flat for our boys to move into, and said she would stay there a couple of days to decorate. A couple of days turned into 6 months, during which time I discovered she had been sleeping with my best friend. He was more like a brother, or so I thought. Left me with a house, 5 kids and a job. Called me and asked if she could come home. I still loved her, so said yes. We argued for 2 weeks. She texted me when I was at work to say she was leaving again. I left work, went home, packed a small bag with a change of clothes and walked out. We had a shared account that my wages went into that was empty the next day along with the savings account. She was never home, never paid the mortgage or utility bills. I went to see the kids one Wednesday and the eldest said they'd had the bailiffs round and had to be out by the weekend. She hadn't been home for 2 weeks. I drove down to my now ex-friend's place, walked in and found them in bed watching the new TV that my money had bought along with new fridge/freezer, washing machine, microwave plus a number of other appliances. Told her I was taking the kids and that, since the previous Thursday, everything to do with the house was in her name as I'd had my name removed. She had signed something to do with divorce papers. Turns out it was to do with the mortgage. I picked the kids up Friday afternoon and all they bought with them were a few personal belongings and a few clothes. I bought everything else from new with the help of my very understanding boss. This was all 18 or 19 years ago. Her and my ex-mate got married, but she has now moved in with her mum as he has moved in a new model that has more money coming in than her. They are in the beginnings of a nasty divorce. She has tried to make contact with me through Facebook and even sent me a message apologizing. No. The kids have no contact with her at all. As a footnote, a few weeks after I left her I had a nervous breakdown. Always thought of myself as an emotionally strong man, but that time in my life, literally, nearly killed me. In my darkest days I often considered suicide. My brother saved my life a couple of times. He didn't know it, and never will, as we lost him to cancer a year and a half ago. I miss him more than I ever missed my ex. Wow, the 20th of June 2017. Read some of the people's comments. My divorce still hurts some 8 years later. And I'm the one who strayed point. Well, having said that, it had become mundane. I worked for myself, and things were slow. She had been promoted, and was over 90 plus people. I'd have a good meal ready for her coming in. We'd say grace and I'd try to have a conversation, whereupon she'd pick up the TV remote control and turn up the volume. She'd go on cruises with her girlfriends. I even asked if I could go. No. I'm an electrician and a couple wanted me to wire their very large new home. The lady took a shine to me. I initially resisted, I know, when I fell in love with my ex, and I know, when it was over, laying in bed she read her book, and it had been best part of 3 weeks since making love. She turned to me and said, "Do you want a hand job, or what?" Wow, really? 6 years courtship plus 35-year married. I submitted to the attentions of a lady 19 years my junior. You go through life and ask yourself the what ifs. Now look back and know the ex and me could have gone the distance, but think happiness would have eluded me. Possibly yes. I put her on a pedestal, but that adoration was not a two-way street. Now looking back and seeing that a higher power has always been there. If I could go back in time and being given that fork in the road now, know where each one would have and has taken me. 41 years is a lot to give up, but knowing what I now know, I would have taken the path I'm now on. I see how my ex treats her new husband and everything is fine. As long as she get her way, she has not changed. I'm sorry I broke my vows, not because of her, but more because of trust in myself. Two good friends have had some shit-tastic divorces. I will tell you both of them. First guy, we can call him Josh. Him and his wife were together, but not married, for 10 years, and then finally went to Hawaii and tied the knot. They were so happy it seemed. Then less than 2 years later he goes into his email, runs an online shop on Etsy, and they have a joint email, and was honestly not looking to snoop, and totally trusted his wife. But right as he logged in, a new email popped up titled, "Let's go to Tahoe this weekend, I can't wait to fuck you in the ass." Needless to say, he opened the email and then backtracked through all the emails sent by this guy, and they were crazy detailed, and she had been faking him for at least 6 months. He confronted her on it, and she flipped out and said it was his fault, that he should have gotten a real job and stop this Etsy bullshit that made him $20K a month, and that because he was always working on new products, that it cut too deep into their relationship. Which was odd, since she mentioned this to exactly 0 of her friends or family members. In the end she took $65K from him, dragged out the divorce for over 2 years, took one of his cars, and he ended up getting together with her older sister friend too. Now this is some shit. We can call him Terry. Terry is in the Navy. Terry joined the Navy because cuntface told him she would leave him if he didn't. Well, they had 2 kids and were married for 6 years up to that point. So Terry said fuck it, he'll join 1 year, all is good. Then on a 6-month deployment Terry gets an email about 4 months in from his wife saying that she is leaving him for a dock worker that lives next door. She goes full beach mode and gets full custody of the kids and wants everything he has. Keep in mind that he has always worked 2 jobs before joining the Navy so that she does not have to work. He is heartbroken, but he carries on and finds a nice girl, but his ex will not sign the divorce. Finally, after 2 years she signs. By that point she has already popped out a kid with Sheethead A, as luck would have it, though Sheethead A only wanted to fuck her, not make babies, so he fucks off back east, and she is alone. At this point she tries to get Terry back, but Terry is done, so she tells the cops he attacked her, and gets him arrested. Nearly loses his job, and is almost dishonorably discharged when it comes to light that she lied. Still not good for him though, so the Navy starts trying to squeeze him out peacefully. At this point Sheethead B appears and starts beating Terry's kids, Thankfully Terry has a great lawyer at this point and some kickers friends, one of which stands on the street corner in the freezing cold and videotapes Sheethead B beating Terry's 4-year-old daughter. Terry gets instant custody of the kids and relocated to California by the Navy, who are not longer trying to get him out 6 months later, and Cuntface moves to California as well, and Sheethead B is gone, and over the course of about 5 months she works her way back into his life, and eventually gets partial custody of the kids. All seems well. Terry is remarried to the new girl, has his job, has his kids, and life is just great. Until Cuntface takes him to court and says that because him and his new wife are full-time Navy, that she needs to do what's best for the kids and move them 9 hours away to live with her family, where they will have their grandparents, both sets, to help raise them. Dipshit Sokol judge says that seems reasonable, and so Cuntface faked off with his kids again, and now he trying to actively leave the Navy so he can move back home and get his kids back for the 3rd time. Not my own story, but I'm very close to the person involved and witnessed everything first-hand point, so to start things off I'll call him Jim and her beach. Jim was pretty successful. Matter of fact, he's one of the higher-ups of a local business and has a nice house. He fell in love with Beach and they married. Jim bought a small coffee shop and Beach started working there. But that coffee shop wasn't profitable enough, so they closed it after around 2 years. But before closing their coffee shop they opened up a restaurant with a bar and Beach was put in charge of the restaurant. It went pretty well, so they opened up yet another coffee shop. And that's where things started going south. All of a sudden the restaurant started losing money. Over the course of a few months they lost around $25,000 and Beach started acting suspicious and stopped sleeping with Jim. Jim found out she had been cheating on him, and upon further investigation she was the reason why the restaurant was losing money. She basically faked the finances, didn't pay her suppliers, and that all fell back on him, because while she was put in charge he was still the official leader of the place. But that's not even where the story ends. Jim discovered that Beach actually put an advertisement on the internet offering sex with strangers in exchange for money, hence the nickname Beach. Considering the fact that she stopped sleeping with him only makes this worse. But oh well, I guess he didn't pay her, so fair enough. Although he did put her in charge of a restaurant, Beach actually attempted to force Jim to sell his house and give her half of the money he got out of it during the divorce process, but the courts crushed pretty much all her demands after being presented all the facts. Not me, but my dad's story. They've now been separated for a few years. He had had enough when he woke up with her choking him at 3 AM and then proceeding to claw his eyes out. That wasn't the first time, either. A few years prior, I guess it all started around 2006 or 2007 or so. I had just moved back home after losing my job and started working with my dad again. We had decided it'd be best if we rented a bigger house to have more room. So we did. At this time, my birth vessel was in her early 60s and my dad in his late 50s. It's a long story, so I'm just going to TLDR it with that she thought my dad and I owned the internet, along with every porn site there was. She believed that we had tons of cash stashed away and were waiting for her to die. She had mental problems and the rest of the family was in denial. Both he and I were victims of her abuse, though he got the much worse end of it, since he got the physical stuff. She would literally rip the shirt off his back, hit him, choke him, scratch him, etc. The police showed up a few times and threatened to take him away because that's how it works. Apparently he went to work a few times with a bloody face and had to try to pass it off as something else. They separated a few times and tried it again, but it didn't work. In the end he finally had enough. She moved in with my half-sister. The good ending is that my dad reconnected with an old friend and they are now retired, living back where they grew up, and he's happier than I've ever seen him. Right after we were married, when I found her having chatroom orgies? Nope. Days later when she accidentally sent me a message about how she wanted a guy she was just saw without his shirt and how he was checking her out? Nope. When I discovered raunchy porn every day in her browser history going back months and she lied about it? Nope. Fight after fight, when she kept threatening me with the D word? Nope. When she tried to seduce one of my friends and he came to his wife and I about it? Nope. When she later refused to do anything with me unless I invited a certain friend of mine, and then she couldn't help but keep touching him and giggling and flirting like crazy. Nope. When she told me on the way to Thanksgiving dinner with my extended family that she no longer loved me and was leaving me for yet another friend of mine, who by the way totally rejected her. Nope. When she was viciously mean to me no matter how hard I tried to please her. Nope. When she brought another date to a fancy dinner out I planned for her. Nope. When she brought yet another date to our daughter's birthday movie. Nope. When she left us for a week and slept with someone else while away. Nope. When she slept with 3 different guys within a single night. Nope. When she brought home HPV. Nope. When she absolutely refused to accept that I could be hurt by all her gallivanting with other men. Nope. When she started disappearing overnight for hours at a time claiming things like going to Redbox. Nope. When she got busted and us drive away going out with another guy because the car broke down. Nope. When she left us again and was literally sleeping with every date she could get. Nope. When she brought home gonorrhea. Nope. When she became official with her latest target. Nope. When she asked for a divorce so she could marry her latest target. Nope. When she filed for divorce. Nope. When she stopped paying any child support. Nope. After 3 years of no support, not helping with our 7 children in any way, the first 2 years seeing them on average 5 hours a month, she is getting closer to 8 hours now. I finally get it. She is evil incarnate. As my oldest son says, I was a cuck. But I'm learning and will never let it happen again. The first wife. I was interviewing a prospective female singer over dinner at a restaurant for a band I played drums in. I'd been trying to recruit this singer because she had a great set of jazz pipes and that sultry smoky lounge torch singer look. Strictly professional relationship. My first wife was a lingerie model when I met her, and when we got married she took up selling women's shoes. She could sell shoes like it was breathing, because when a gorgeous woman gushingly tells you that the shoes look awesome, then the shoes look awesome. So I'm interviewing the singer, and my wife shows up with her boyfriend, and doesn't notice me for many minutes until well after the kissing, and groping, and eyes, and her shoe ran up the inside of his leg. I walked up, she clocked on that I had been in the restaurant, tried to bullshit me. I told her what I witnessed, and she got huge hurt eyes, and tried to sugar me the way she sugared her clients. I took the ring off, coin flipped it at her, told her we are getting a divorce, it's over. Ended up that night in bed with the jazz singer's second wife. I knew the divorce was happening when she lied to my face about messaging the male lover I knew about from her using the computer I bought her to sext him, faking in the apartment I paid for, talking to him on the phone I paid for. As proceedings went on I found out about the others. Things were bad. We had tried counseling. When I expressed my own frustrations with the marriage she tuned out and refused to try more counseling. Ultimately she took a 3-week vacation with our son to Germany. I really wanted to go, but she would not put it off a month or so until I could come along. When she was gone, I felt like a large grey cloud had been lifted off my shoulder. Still I vowed to try. Before she came back, I cleaned the house and tried to make it nice for her to show how glad I was back. She accused me of cheating. A few days later it was Mother's Day. She was a stay-at-home mom, but had a part-time job on weekends to give her some walk-around money on top of the money that I was giving her each month, and unbeknownst to me at the time, my mom was also giving her a few $100s each month. Despite all of this, she had maximumed out her credit cards for the 3rd time in 5 years of marriage. Anyhow, our son kicked her in the bed. She began screaming and then sobbing and said, "Why can't I just get away from you both?" She went into our son's room and called her mom or dad and went on a tirade about how terrible I was. I decided that afternoon that if she was really that miserable I could no longer make myself miserable to provide her dream to her. So I told her the next day I was out. It was a long time coming but a pretty foolish decision, as she chose to attempt to take my son away from me in retaliation. Divorce was a year of hell. In the end she got the better deal with our son. Oregon is not a joint custody state, but I still got almost 50% time and we have a great relationship today. It was the worst year of my life, and probably cost me several $100,000. And to the question, why is divorce so expensive, I can only answer, because it's faking worth it. I have my sanity back. I'm in the best health of my adult life. My relationships that have followed have not been perfect by any stretch, but have been a million times better, and I do think that ultimately I'll find true happiness with another partner. Curated cliché. We weren't married, thank goodness, but were together for 6-1/2 years. The last straw. The moment. That point where I said no more. It was just that. I literally woke up one morning and had an epiphany about several aspects of my life. The biggest one was, by which I mean it was the idea behind everything I changed. I'm not obligated, nor am I being magnanimous, in dealing with all this bullshit. I went and worked my 14-hour shift, which, as per usual, was 18 hours, excluding the commute, at the job I had suddenly realized was actually harming me. Came home at 2 AM and found 2 sinks full of dishes left by people not me, a house that hadn't been cleaned since my last day off, 2-3 weeks prior. Who knows? Absolutely no clean clothes. Read. No clean laundry, no food, and only my paycheck to pay for the house, the bills, the cars and the drinks, and I hadn't even started drinking in earnest. She woke up while I was attempting, and honestly failing, to quietly requisition the closet full of laundry, hers too. One thing lead to another wherein I caved to my mounting frustration and despondency about our situation. I voice my thoughts on everything, starting with my epiphany. What was for me a grand and profound realization she boiled down to: you're throwing away 6 years together, and for what? Some stupid half-formed thought you had when you just woke up. That should have been the moment, but I'd already arrived at an obvious conclusion. She was the biggest share of things I didn't have to take care of. I explained the conclusions I had reached in clear, simple terms. Anyone who knows me knows things are serious when I can simplify, and the response I got was no. No, I wasn't asking a question. I was asserting my independence from a mentally abusive partner, a girl of 26 years who spent 35% more money than she made, averaged over 5 years, as those were the only financial statements I had, who accused me of hiding money from her, who rifled my phone on a regular basis, I learned later, who constantly made me feel like I was weighing us down. It took another 6 months, which I do count towards our relationship, to get her out of the house I owned, that I funded with my money, that I maintained with my grit and sweat, and that I bought for her when I found myself with sufficient savings and income to buy a house, and she couldn't stand living in an apartment where the other units in the building would be feeding us income. Poor people live in apartments. I don't actually regret a single second of the time I spent with her. I do regret that I cannot look back in memory and recall happiness. I know we were happy at times. That said, I can barely comprehend the complete and utter antithesis my wife or my marriage is compared to that point anyway. Off topic to be sure, but I feel better. This is not my story, but one of the most heartbreaking stories I've ever heard. A buddy of mine was married for 10 years to his high school sweetheart. They'd been together since they were 15 and got married at 20. She was unable to have children, so they started looking at adoption and IVF. She just really wanted to be a mum. My buddy would work every hour God sends to get enough bank to buy a place, so they would be a more attractive prospect to the adoption folk. From the outside you could see that he was giving everything, and she was truly grateful. Everyone rooted for them. They bought a house, a very nice one, and started the process of being vetted for adoption. In this time period she was given the okay to start IVF treatment, but they decided not put all their eggs in one basket and continue with the adoption process. After about a year they were rejected by the adoption folk and the IVF just didn't seem to be working. This put a huge strain on the marriage and she went faking nuts. He used to show up with scratches and bruises all over his face and arms. We told him to leave her, he wouldn't. Then he disappeared for a while and none of us knew what had happened. Didn't answer his phone, and he was gone from social media. About 6 months later he reappeared and said he had been working on his marriage and things seemed to be getting better. About 6 months after that she announced she was pregnant. Happy days. Only it wasn't his. She had been faking some guy on the side for about 2 years and the baby was his. He walked away with nothing. Left her the house and everything. He eventually met someone else and has a couple of kids of his own. The last time I saw her she was drunk, pregnant and necking some random dude in a bar. Turns out the IVF works. Not divorced yet, but secretly preparing to. It wasn't one moment, it was a ton of things piling up until one day I thought, I'm so miserable, I will never be happy with her, and she won't fix what's wrong with her. While I was in therapy trying to work through my own stuff. She's an immigrant who complains about America constantly, and refuses to assimilate, and wants us to move to China. I'm white and only speak English, so I can teach English. I hate teaching. I'm in school for it, and will make twice as much. She won't leave the house without me, and refuses to learn how to use American money. It's the same concept as Chinese money. She gets mad at me if I play a video game once in a blue moon to unwind between school and work, while she refuses to work. Also, I find that I cook all meals and wash all dishes every day. Again, she does nothing all day. She pouts until she gets her way, and gets angry at the drop of a hat. She used to threaten to leave me until I caved into her insane demand. I stopped caring, so now she begs me to stay. I noticed she switched her tactics from anger to scare me into getting her way to begging and using pity. I see the flash of anger sometimes, though. She has the thinnest skin ever, and sometimes she forgets which persona she's supposed to be. She didn't give a shit when I tried to hang myself. I'm okay and have been getting help for nearly a year. She blamed me for her rabbit in China dying, even though I was in America. I couldn't bring him because of Chinese regulations, and no rabbit can survive that flight, so it's all my fault. Now my family doesn't like her, so she's trying to alienate me from them. We have an interview with immigration in a few weeks, but I won't filed by then. She stupidly signed divorce papers giving me everything. We don't have much anyway, just some cheap IKEA furniture, back when she was threatening to leave all the time. She did this twice. The first time I ripped them up. The second time I kept them in a safe deposit box, and she doesn't know. You're donezo, kid. This happened to an acquaintance and classmate. I heard it from all of our common friends as he was telling everyone after it. He had a really good buddy of his. They had been best friends all through high school and college. It was a week or two before the wedding. The guy said he didn't want to have a bachelor party. Instead, his buddy and wife surprised him and took him out drinking in a revitalized downtown. They ended up getting way shit-faced. They had one of those hotel rooms that has a living room and multiple rooms. He passed out on his bed after they came back to the room and got even more drunk there. Later that night he woke up alone. He made his way to his buddy's room to find his buddy nailing his wife, both of them sheet-faced. I never heard how he immediately reacted, but apparently he told every one of his friends and former classmates afterwards. He called off the wedding, which must have been a lot of money because his family was pretty well off. His friend left like 2 weeks later, taking a job in Seattle, very far away from where they were living, Texas. Apparently the friend would never come back to Texas, or if he did in this particular city he hid it. He just cut off all his friends out of shame. A few people didn't know and were hurt that the friend just went to Seattle and wouldn't talk to them. I actually friended the wife on Facebook as I'd forgotten her full name. Later I remember the story when I saw her face. She is incredibly super duper insanely religious and critiques random people on her Facebook page about being immoral. The friend that left to go to Seattle, while not religious, is super about personal responsibility. We've gotten into arguments on other people's pages. I guess he figured everyone forgot or no one ever told me. I haven't mentioned it. Apparently she was pretty mean when he asked for the ring back. I was married for less than a year. That's how much of a mistake I made. We got married on New Year's Eve. It was a small civil service with a family friend of hers as a minister. She had her direct family come, and I had my brother there with me. As any good brother should, he asked, "You sure you want to do this, man?" I remember distinctly thinking, what's the worst that happens? I end up divorced in a year. Now she was in the Air Force, and I was planning to join myself. She had already been away for 6 months when we got married, and had 2 more to go. I spent those 6 months working my ass off saving up money in the case she got stationed anywhere but the one base in our state, and for a ring. The blessing in disguise while she was away was that I was able to focus on myself, and in that time I lost close to 40 pounds. February rolled around and she got her assignment, and it just so happened she got the one base in our state. Cool. I wouldn't have to give up the business I had helped start from the ground. At the time I was running a vape shop and living 5 minutes down the road. Running business was a dream I always had, and there's nothing quite like being your own boss. Well, the base was an hour away from where I was working and living. I figured I got to keep the job I loved instead of giving it up altogether. Driving never bothered me anyway, and the piece of shit car she bought got 40 miles to the gallon, so we switched off cars. The problem started because I was working too much. Yeah, I was running a business and commuting 2 hours on top of that. She just got back to the area and was slow to make friends. I slowly start pulling back on my hours to help her acclimate, but of course my business suffered because of it. Eventually it got to the point where she would just lose her shit about anything and everything. At the time I tried to be empathetic. She was an air traffic controller for the Air Force. I figured she was just taking her stressful job out on me. I did my best to bite my tongue, and it wasn't easy. Of course, looking back, she was just pretty rotten to the core. Her little rampages ended up wearing me down. Even though I was maintaining our apartment, cooking, taking care of our dog, and trying to make up for lost hours at work, I was good for nothing in her eyes. Getting told I was a useless piece of shit almost daily, I quickly lost the passion for the business I once loved. Yeah, it was vaping, and the culture surrounding it kind of sucks, but it may have saved my life. I quit smoking cigarettes 3 years ago, and no longer do either, thanks to vaping. Both of my grandfathers died of smoking related illnesses. I gave up my shop and found a job closer to my new home. I was working a golf course on base, so I was working another job that I loved passionately. At this point in my life I'd already spent at least 3 years working everything but the kitchen on a golf course. Groundskeeping paid second only to caddying, but it was my favorite job on a course. Where I'm from, courses close for the winter, so ideally I would find work as the season closed out. Not too much changed with the new job. I was still working miles off, and I was still the same old useless piece of shit to her. On the bright side, I was out of work by 2, so every other week our schedules would line up. I don't know what was bright about it though. Towards the end I looked forward much more to the weeks our schedules were opposite. The company of my dog was much less stressful. All this time I had been working on enlisting, and by now I had already killed it on the ASVAB. I had a pick at any job I wanted, and I knew better then to listen to anything a recruiter would tell me to get me out sooner. Now the problem was I had to find a job that had an opening at the base I was living by, because her job had priority and only a handful of jobs I could get would trump hers. There were a couple sure shots that my then wife encouraged me to pick. Services, a receptionist at the gym, or cook. Personnel, an ID card maker, among other things. It's one thing that I was taking a pay cut to join, but to go from being my own boss to handing out towels wasn't the life I was looking for. If I was a useless piece of shit before I enlisted, I'd end up a self-loathing useless piece of shit with any of those jobs for sure. Instead I had 2 dream jobs, a computer programming job and a flying job. The computer programming job could get stationed just about anywhere, so it would be good for our marriage. The problem with that one was the EDPT was a barrier to entry. It was an incredibly tough sequence and logic test. The questions themselves weren't hard, but the sheer number of them you had to complete and the time limit is really what strained you. The flying job, on the other hand, would not have been so good for my marriage. It was one of those jobs that would take priority over hers, so we would have had to spend at least 1.5 years apart while I went through training. When it came to picking my dream sheet, I listed a bunch of Intel jobs I knew never dropped and put the programming and flying job at the top of my list. The liaison showing me the available jobs let me know the flying job was in demand and had a ship date that lined up perfectly with when I finished my work at the golf course. At that point I still wanted my marriage to work out, because who wants to be divorced at 23? So I was really hoping I'd passed the EDPT point. A few days after I took the test I got the bad news that I passed, but not by enough to get the job. The good news was I got the flying job I wanted, but I knew it was a death sentence for my marriage. At this point in time it was August and a few days before my birthday. We talked about the news I'd received and what we were going to do about it. She left me with an ultimatum. Leave the job on the table or leave me. Lucky for me, just in time for my birthday, I found out she was planning on faking a dude once I left for basic. That was when I realized, yup, I'm asking this girl to divorce me. Luckily, I made it out without too much damage. She racked up a couple thousand in credit card debt and took all the furniture. The only thing I really lost out of that marriage was that damn dog. I'd never had a dog so dumb or so beautiful. I ended up moving in with my brother and went back to commuting 2 hours a day. I slept in the same bed as him, but I'm more than thankful I got to spend those 2 months with him before I left, even if it was living pretty impoverished. During those 2 months I met some cool people and really made some great memories before I signed 4 years of my life away. TLDR, got called a useless piece of shit. Got a new job. Got called a useless piece of shit. Enlisted in the Air Force. She wasn't happy I ended up with the job I did. Found out she was planning on faking Jodie while I was gone. Finally noped out of their point and now I'm peacefully alone in Alabama. On the most complete train wreck of a road trip there ever was, she began threatening suicide because she started thinking she wouldn't get a job that she just interviewed for. Note, not a job where she'd built up to it for years. It was pretty mundane. And not because of some deep dark fear about herself that not getting the job would prove. And we had no concern about economic hardship, although she sometimes worried out loud that we would become homeless. As you might have guessed by now, she just had a severe anxiety problem that she refused to get help for. She continued to threaten suicide over a 2-day period as we drove across New Mexico. I think the exact moment where I decided this was it was as I found myself repeating, I can't live like this. I can't live like this another minute on Christmas night as I was walking alone to Frontier in Albuquerque. Thank goodness it was open. Green chilies make anything better, right? At one point the next night we were parked at a rest stop and she was in the bathroom for an uncomfortably long period and I started wondering if she had opened her wrists and I started thinking, do I check on her? Call 911. Just get back on the freeway and enjoy my life from now on. Obvious no to the last one. Not for noble motives, I'd be the target of an investigation. This was against a backdrop of such threats and occasional self-harm and me telling her for 2 years that if we didn't work on her behavior, I would divorce her in the near future. Threat of immediate divorce previously got her to go with me to counseling exactly twice. Immediate as in, if we don't go this week, I'll kick you out Saturday morning. For professional timing reasons I couldn't file immediately, but my mind was made up that day. My previous comment about this marriage on Reddit, TLDR, for goodness sakes don't have kids with someone you don't like, which fortunately I didn't with her, got the most upvotes of any comment I ever wrote. In the months that followed the initial separation, ironically she started going to a psychiatrist and taking meds, and she made a point of telling me this, but at that point I just never wanted to see her ever again. And by the way, woe/men, if you're with someone crazy, it worked out. I'm remarried and very happy to be with a wonderful woman. Even if I hadn't met my current wife, I would be a lot happier on my own than with my ex. At first I felt guilty about ending it because she was so helpless, but I had told her over and over again very clearly what the consequence would be if we didn't get help for her. Not a divorced man, but I do know why my dad ended it with my mom. There were 2 big reasons. She was awful with money. I don't just mean she wasn't good at budgeting. I mean she was spending way more than she could. She had a job prior to me being born, but after about 6 months of me being born she decided to quit and be a full-time mom. Now, my dad isn't rich or anything, but he is very well off, so he could easily afford to support us on his own. He even gave my mom $1,500 a month for spending money. This wasn't used for anything other than if she wanted to go shopping or whatever. He paid all the bills, paid for the tuition for my half-sister, not even his real daughter, to go to college, paid for groceries or dinner if we went out to eat, paid for everything. This $1,500 was literally just for her shopping and whatnot. Well, apparently $1,500 a month wasn't enough for her shopping, as, in the 7 years from her quitting work and my parents divorcing, she managed to rack up about $10,000 in credit card debt, which my dad had to pay off for her as it was connected to him as well. This is the big one. She accused my dad of cheating on her multiple times. He wasn't, with almost no evidence. The most evidence she ever had was a condom wrapper she found on the floor. In that instance, she brings it to my dad and accuses him of cheating on her. Well, my dad knew it wasn't his condom wrapper. Remember that half-sister I mentioned previously? He put 2 and 2 together pretty quickly and realized that the condom wrapper must have been from her and her boyfriend. At the time, she would have been somewhere around like 16 or 17, so rather than my dad telling my mom that it was from my sister and her boyfriend, he just says something like, "If I was going to cheat on you, why in the world would I do it in this house?" and then throw a condom wrapper in the hallway. Fast forward a few years to right before their divorce, and my dad finds out that she had been cheating on him for a few years. Irrelevant and relevant at the same time. I have a friend who I considered until recently to be my best friend for the past 8 years. He met this girl 2 years ago, and after a few months of dating he told me he was going to marry her, to which I told him it was a stupid idea. She lived in Korea, so he thought it was the right thing to do for her to get permanent residency here in America. She would visit for a few months here and there to keep the relationship going. As I got to meet her, I realized she was actually a really good person. Fast forward to this year. While she was in Korea, he would completely neglect her, and since I was his best friend she would constantly text and call me, sometimes even crying to understand why he is acting like he is. I told her for her sake she shouldn't have to deal with him and let things go, partially siding with my friend because I can tell he was starting to lose interest in her. I don't know how it happened, but he decides to actually go for the marriage, so she moved here a couple months ago. There are minor details about their everyday life that I consider to have major impact on their relationship, but for the sake of time I will cover one detail. He is basically never home, and when he is always sleeping, because he works manual labor 70+ HR weeks, and since she has no license nor friends except me in this foreign country, she often texts me not even to hang out, but to have somewhat of a social life. Knowing this, my friend, who at the time I considered my best friend, gets extremely insecure and fights with her about how she going to cheat on him with me. These fights continue on a daily basis, and on a daily basis my name is spoken from his mouth to attack his bride-to-be. A few weeks ago she called me privately and told me she has had enough of him and asked if we can meet and talk. Even though slightly feeling guilty, I also felt pity for her, so I agreed to it. That was when she dropped the bomb. She told me that my friend was beating her constantly. On her arms and legs were the biggest bruises I have ever seen. I'm an amateur boxer, so I see bruises pretty often, but no, these were huge. That's when I stopped considering him to be my best friend. To be honest, I don't even know what I consider him to be now. A week after, she texted me saying she wanted to hang out. Remember how my friend was getting insecure at her with me? Well, I slightly started to see what he was seeing. She was flirting with me. At first I didn't really notice it, being that I was her only friend in America, so I just took it that she was being really nice. Later into the night she ended kissing me. That was when I had to back off and think about the whole situation. It just completely confused me, but at the same time, didn't surprise me at all. Does she really have feelings for me? Or is it because I'm her only friend and I happen to be a guy? To some extent I'm probably a gateway of release to her miserable relationship at home. Anyway, she contacted me today saying they got legally married today, lol. We are still friends of course, and we keep in touch like nothing happened. I don't know how to conclude this, and there is way more I can say about this, but I know for a fact the marriage isn't going to work out. I mean, come on, her husband is beating her. But question, do I have any say in this? She told me privately at the beatings, so should I say anything to him? Things were rocky, again, for the third time in our less than 2.5-year-old marriage. The previous 2 rough times had been a result of her screwing around outside the marriage point. On this particular night she had gone out to dinner with her younger sister. It was a Monday night. I was already a bit of a mess because I was so tired of putting up with all this, and it was wearing me down. I was also sleeping on the couch by her request, since she needed space. I just started on a new client that day. I was a consultant, and that was a bit stressful, since it was a big job with a lot riding on it, and she knew this. I couldn't sleep already, but it didn't help that I kept looking at the clock. 11 PM no word from her. Midnight still nothing. 1 AM now I'm worried that something happened to her, since she doesn't stay out this late, and she has work the next day. I text her, nothing. 2 AM nothing. 3 AM text again, hey just want to make sure you're okay. Still nothing. I can't sleep, so I decide F this. I'm sleeping in my own bed and at least getting comfortable. Now I'm half concerned and half pissed. 4 AM rolls around and I still haven't heard from her or her sister, and now I'm concerned and getting mad at myself for being pissed. In the past I would have been concerned that she was banging around town again. That thought had crossed my mind, but it surprisingly did nothing, and I no longer even cared if she was sleeping around. At that point I decided that I was done. 415. I hear the door open and now all concern and anger goes out the door and I stay calm. She comes in the room, I say hi, she says hey, and she grabs her clothes and goes and lays on the couch in the other room without saying a word. I didn't sleep at all that night. I got it, if bed in the morning, and told her I was moving out because I couldn't deal with it. I packed some things and went to stay with my parents. The amount of relief I felt when I moved out was quite surprising. I thought I would be upset by moving out. Don't get me wrong, I was, but the relief I had was profound and stood out more than anything else. I started being able to sleep again. I was able to eat again. I was actually enjoying my life and happy again. I later found out that she had been with a guy she met at our gym the night she didn't come home. I don't know why she ever said yes to marrying me, but I learned a lot about myself and what's important to me in the long run. It was hell going through it at the time, but it's been about 1.5 years since I moved out, and I can honestly say I think I'm happier and better for it. I wish divorce upon no one. In my eyes, when you marry someone you make a promise to fully trust one another. When one party repeatedly takes advantage of that and shows no signs of wanting to fix it, there is no coming back from that. Divorce isn't for everyone, as it shouldn't, because it is so gut-wrenching. I wish it upon no one, but it's working out quite nicely for me. Oh, where to start? This all happened in the last year of a 3-year relationship. She brought home a puppy without telling me, expected her 10-year-old son to know how to take care of it automatically. When he slacked off, she referred to pup as a human being. I chuckled thinking she was pulling a dad joke. She was serious. We lived in a rented townhouse at the time. No one at home for the better part of the day. Both of us on call. Stupid move. I was visiting my mother in a hospital across town. 20-minute drive. I was gone a total of 2 hours. Asked me if I was really at the hospital, and if I still wanted to be with her. Stopped me from going to gym or any other sports activity, unless we all went as a family. I argued her son can't go in yet to the gyms. The 100-degree weather made it impossible to be outside every time. Her response: then we all go as a family or you look for another one. Would panic if any female would make any sort of small talk with me. Even family point would make any excuse not to see my family during holidays, unexpected illness, her side of family emergency etc. If I went on my own, as promised, she would go out with her friends or family. Jesus unexpectedly and miraculously healed her. We lived together 3 years, had a total of 6 home cooked meals every weekend, had one of her relatives basically live with us. Any oral issues she thought were devastating. She would bring up any issue while we were in bed, which led to sleepless nights for me, or her leaving our bedroom if I felt like resting after 20 hours of being out of bed. Any argument, she would leave with family for the night and not tell me where she was. I was always the bad guy. Her conversations were what knew things were going on with the Kardashians, or why I didn't agree with what Rachel Maddow said was true. The entire time I debated whether to cancel the satellite subscription. I ended up taking more call days and volunteer weekend shifts just to not be around her. The final kicker: walked away one weekend, defeated after she threatened to call the cops on me for DV. According to her, because I was emotionally abusive. The truth was I stopped/took her son's side after I heard him screaming, only to find her slapping him around for not cleaning his room on a summer Saturday. Close bracket. She had a serious conversation with me the next Monday after I returned from a nice restful weekend in a hotel. Said the only way to save our relationship is for her to get pregnant. So, it could bring us closer together. There are many more. This is just off the top of my head. Point. Yes, she was very attractive with 2-4 natural curves. Extremely sensual in bed and pretty much open to anything. Point. Yes, my fault for not ending it sooner and choosing her for all the wrong reasons. This all started 3 weeks ago, and I'm miserable right now. I go to college and work part-time, while she works full-time, married young. She can't manage money and, even after fighting about it tooth and nail for months, every single month she's short on cash. She doesn't know where her money is. I have to continuously bail her out on my 30 hours per week to her 50 hours per week. She can't be alone. Whenever I make plans with a friend, she has to scramble to make her own. She's jealous of me and my friends, even though they are great to her and treat her very nicely. She's depressed and doesn't like sex. I know it makes me suspicious too. She is vile levels of messy and disorganized. Her car is literally a dumpster with enough room for a driver. I have to battle her to keep the apartment from getting that way as well. Tips on the floor, hair clogged shower drain with standing water, mountains of cloths, pricer tags, earrings, jewelry, trash all over the place all the time. She does nothing around the apartment. Doesn't do dishes, doesn't do laundry, doesn't clean rooms. She's literally useless. Can't bring home money and can't take care of anything. She likely has undiagnosed AD/AD or something. The final straw was when, for months, I had warned her and I was planning to take an intense summer session class that meant less time for working. I saved money from checks and my tax return to help pay bills while I worked less. 5 days before class starts, she tells me she has 2 unpaid traffic citations. They were overdue by a lot. She had no money, as usual, to pay them, so I had to bail her out. I paid over $700. Her license was only a day or 2 from suspension, and that would have been an extra $200. I paid them and threw a fuming fit all day. 4 days later I ask her to get the power and internet since I paid so much, and she just says, nope, I don't have any money. I wrench her card from her and check everything online, and even in the past 4 days, after I bailed her out for those citations, she had spent $98 on fast food alone. We had a huge fight and she's staying with a friend going on 3 weeks now. I'm broke, in an intense class, and emotionally disturbed at the moment. I told her to get the fuck out, and haven't seen her since. We are more than certain to get divorced. FML. Well, TBH, she's the one who started the separation. Cool 7th wedding anniversary gift. And I did try to hold on for a while, because at the start it had seemed like some kind of temporary insanity and life carried onwards and upwards as closely as ever, until a very artificial overnight switch to complete cold shoulder tactics. Even then I was still uncertain. There were good days, great days, and days that seemed to make no sense. We still lived together for 6 months, after she fired the starter pistol in January. 2 months in I saw her joke about doing something very legally damaging to me for factual reason. 3 months in, I'd gotten worried enough to bust into her histories and logs. I would asked her for a divorce then, because I found exactly how much of a pathological liar she'd been both to and about me, in a viciously spiteful, cruel, evil way. She was spinning me in the worst possible light, retconning our whole relationship, to make it all seem terrible thanks to me, poisoning almost every mutual friend against me, salting the earth by going on about me to new friends she was making, people I'd never even met or spoken to, but I'm sure I will eventually as her crowd grows, and adding all of the BS she spewed together. It made me look like some caricature evil villain of a husband from a faking B-movie. And people bought it, because she was popular and friendly. She even joked about that last part to her latest victim. Seriously, a kid way younger than her, and a virgin to boot. She's gone full midlife crisis cougar. So yeah, finding out all that pretty much had her. If we weren't already getting a divorce, I'd be suing for adultery right now. Vote. It was tempting to write up till before moving out. because even though she'd gotten the house/kid/car end of the deal, and I was definitely gone soon, she still kept beating the dead horse/me to anyone who'd listen. It's probably all for the sake of painting a bullseye on me, so people concentrate on super nasty husband rather than her plus boy toy, who are both more than a bit worried about what they're doing looking bad to others. So they're trying to hide it and distract people from it. Had already gone through one cheating event, but it was early on in the relationship. We were away from each other at that point, and I decided to let it slide after much crying and cajoling and blaming it on booze on her part. It was a super dramatic scene, but I caved and figured it was behind us. 3 years and a ring later, she says she's catching a plane to go visit her folks in upstate New York. We lived in Maine. The plan was to head to work that day, and then she'd go from work to the airport. She did this about every 6 months or so I didn't think twice about it. I was sick that morning with an ugly cold, so I stayed home. Eventually the phone rang. To this day I have no idea why she decided to use a landline for this instead of her cell phone. I'll let the machine get it. And I heard, "Hello Ms. Voidmark, this is Delta Airlines and we're confirming your flight to California." California, where the fling with the other dude had happened. Called her folks, who I was reasonably close with. Found out she hadn't been down to visit in around a year. Mom-in-law was horrified when I told her what was up. Called her up, feigning ignorance, and asked if she could drive up and visit us. "Oh, no, I'm visiting a friend in California." "Well, can I come next weekend?" "Oh no, I'll be very busy with work, and so will Voidmark." "I'll come down and visit you, don't worry about it." "Is this friend a male friend?" "Yeah, an old friend from school." "Does Voidmark know about this?" "Yes mom." "Geez, he's totally fine with it. He trusts me." "Don't be weird. You have such antiquated views on this stuff." Mom-in-law called me back and agreed to make the drive up to get her stuff. She was beyond livid. The apartment was in my name and I owned most of the things in it, so I changed the locks that afternoon and took her name off the lease. We loaded her stuff into the van, and she drove it back to New York and put it all in the garage. I didn't want to talk to her, so her parents got her on the phone and confronted her. She denied everything until they'd told her they'd already talked to me about it, and she freaked out. She was informed that I was done. Her stuff had been moved out, and her family was furious with her. Her response was to cancel her plane ticket home, and she just stayed out in California. Got the papers signed through the mail. We never even spoke after the morning she left. To my knowledge she's still there. I won't say I'm happy for her, but she did go without any kind of fuss. Had no idea she was that good of a liar, but honestly I'm kinda glad it went down like that. Had it not been for that phone call I'd have been none the wiser. Actually going through the, hopefully final, stages of the divorce at this moment. Background. After nearly 11 years of marriage, found out that she had been having an affair for at least 18 months with a coworker. When she started it, our kids were 3 years and 1.5 years old. We weren't always great together, but damn did we work. Had to come from nothing in our early years to being incredibly comfortable later in our marriage. Both have been very fortunate professionally. I was fully broadsided by her affair and truly admired, respected, and loved her. She was my best friend. I stuck around for 18 months and went through all the phases of trauma afterwards. I swore that my kids would never experience divorce as I did, but I came to the realization that anyone who could treat their family like this and also not make significant commitment to being a better partner wasn't worth staying with. This took me a while, but the signs were there, like the disengagement, the random over-the-top abuse towards me, like when I took her to Europe for her 40th, etc. Weirdly it took me going back home to Texas, I live overseas, to see my friends and family, when I finally admitted to myself that I was done. It kind of was like a farewell tour, prepping myself, friends and my family for this tectonic shift. I sometimes question my choice, especially considering the abuse I've copped since I've left, the impact to our very young children and the jealousy that I've managed to duplicate everything we had together. I took almost nothing, and between leaving and today have a new house, contents, car, wonderful partner, job promotion, etc. High school sweetheart with a troubled family, dad in prison on felony charges, mom fled the state due to warrants, so my family took her in and raised her from 16 years old. I mean literally treated her as a daughter, spent time out of their days and weekends teaching her to drive when she had a permit, paid in full for her first car so she wouldn't accrue interest from a loan, helped finance her through college, went to football games to watch her cheerlead, etc. Sweetest most innocent girl to walk the earth. At that time, I enlist in the Marine Corps. She forces my hand into marriage. We move across the country to my first duty station. And down the hill we go. Our bar covers housing, cost of living, etc. We agree that I'll support us while she finishes school online. Life is good. She starts blowing off school because it's an at your own pace curriculum. She says she misses her friends, constantly blames me for the drastic lifestyle change, expects me to put more effort into the relationship as a result. I get frustrated with each day. It starts to show. Doesn't help the situation. First deployment arrives. I look forward to it as a much needed break from each other to remember why we love each other and get back on track with our lives/future. Nope. Her school situation continues to decline. She goes out with her girlfriends to bars, underage, and drives home drunk regularly, a faking nightmare for me, because I'm liable for everything she does as a dependent. I grow increasingly frustrated as each small window of communication we have with each other is just disappointment after disappointment. I'm half the world away. She's getting positive attention from Marines in bars. No sheet. They just want to bang the pretty girl at the bar. Welcome to adulthood. She cheats on me repeatedly in the last 2 faking weeks of my deployment. I find out from a Marine looking out for me, not the Jodie, literally as I'm boarding the plane. That was a long flight. She lies her ass off until she finally gives in after 3 days of trying to get an explanation. So, after roughly 7 years together, and my family and myself giving her the world, she decides being an adult isn't what she wants to do just yet, has the audacity to blame me for her cheating, ironically doesn't understand why my family, her friends, hell even our marriage counselor distance themselves and give her a collective "are you insane?" response when she seeks moral support/confirmation for her actions. Final straw was her guilting me when I lost almost 20 pounds from the depression, developed a drinking problem, had breakdowns almost every day, etc. Point because it makes her feel kinda bad, and she is getting tired of apologizing. Oh, and the kicker, I was only experiencing what people our age are supposed to experience as a married woman, child, crazy beach. Point TLDR. After 7 years together and myself/family providing her a significantly better life than her own family could, high school sweetheart cheats on me in the final 2 weeks of my first deployment, then blames me for her actions. Not divorced, but was in a long relationship with someone I thought I loved. When we first met I was timid and reserved, being burned multiple times by unstable women, and so was I this time, but it didn't take long to fall for her. I worked the first shift, while she was working second at a kiosk stand. I was doing a little bit better money-wise than her, but didn't mind. She liked me for who I was, and I liked her back. After a pretty long time of good sex, sweet messages and hanging out with me, we started going out with her friends. I slowly started realizing that her past, which I brushed off for months, is far more influencing her than I thought. Her friends were all drug and alcohol abusers, had shitty jobs, no ambitions. She was the best out of the bunch, but I could clearly see that she hangs out with them for more than just past friendships. What I brushed off at first as harmless drinking after work turned out to be very heavy alcoholism that she practiced for years. I don't smoke, nor do I drink a lot, but she did way more than I do, and that was to cope with the world full of assholes and whatnot. Her sweet words stopped. She would dodge session dates. I didn't change anything in the way I behaved, but she started distancing herself from me while still using the services I provided. For instance, lifts to and from work, bringing her food that I made myself. She would never make food for me, not even herself. Going to cinemas and restaurants. Thankfully it didn't take too long before I realized I'm just being used, but I loved her enough to endure it, hoping it would change if I go the extra mile with all the effort. Point the moment I realized that all the work I'm putting in is for naughters, when she made a huge fit over her being late. That's right, we were supposed to meet one day afternoon, after she has her tattoo done, and finishes her date with girlfriend, that came from England. I was alright with it, cracked open a cold one with the boys the night before, and needed to recuperate anyway. But when the time was nearing, she said she will be late. And then later. And later. While we were supposed to meet to go to a local festival around afternoon, by the time she was back home it was long over, and it was late evening. I told her that I hate when someone wastes my time on waiting, and while I tried to be respectful and understanding, she threw a massive fit over me not caring about her needs. The second she got mental at me for not being patient, after all she had to endure all the waiting in the first place, I knew this relationship is over. Started noticing all the flaws she had, her general mental instability, her cut marks on hands, the environment she was around. While I still loved her, cutting contact was the best move in this situation. So not quite divorced, but we had talked of getting married. Mostly she wanted it, but I felt uneasy. First thing that made me wary was the very pushy, very rough making out, like biting hard enough to draw blood. She got worse and worse as the relationship went on. Point we visited her family for, and she got on a new birth control. While we were there, she had horrible cramps, so that helped. She texted me a week or so later about a guy stalking her. Being young, stupid, and full of bravado, I purchased a gun. After I returned home, I was gone for 2 weeks for military duty, just in case. At this point she started acting more and more erratic, saying that this guy was following her and looking through her windows and such. I was getting calls and texts from her literally every few minutes while at work, regardless of her knowing I could not answer them. A lot of other things were going on in my life and I contemplated suicide quite a few times just to be rid of her and extended family, making my life a living hell. It finally came to a head when she called me one night and said there was someone in her house. I lived separate due to religious and other reasons at the time. I came in with gun up and ready, cleared the house, but for her bedroom she opens the door and I see a chef's knife in her hand. She tells me she is giving back my stuff, a small box of it packed, and at that point I thought she would. She was also talking crazy about numbers and random people, commit suicide. I threw her against the wall, ripped the knife from her hand, and called her mom to come watch over her. Since I had to report again the next morning, her mom didn't think I was telling the truth and saying she would never do that, but fortunately she finally drove out and I refused to get back with her. It turned out she was having a reaction to the new pills she was on and didn't want to stop taking them. There was many other things I left out that happened, but that sums up the main reason, I guess. TLDR, my girlfriend fiance tried to kill herself in front of me with kitchen knife due to back's reaction to birth control pills. It began to creep in my mind when she started insisting I should delete my MySpace page, showing how long ago it was. She was always somewhat controlling and jealous, but I was young and very stupid. I'm just very stupid now. I did in the end, because I really didn't care about it in the first place and wanted to keep the peace. But it did throw up a red flag, and I started going through my phone bill, which at the time was nice, and had a list of phone numbers called and texted. Found out she had a boyfriend. Things went downhill from there. I confronted her, and she went berserk. Suddenly I was cheating on her, and then my mom was suddenly mean to her, and the dog hated her, which he didn't. That dog loved everything. My cat on the other hand would have torn her eyes out if she thought she could have gotten away with it. I created a new MySpace account and attempted to move on. She started stalking me through MySpace. I was getting threatening messages from random accounts, which as usual manuscript did nothing about. Back then there were groups you could join. She started posting to those as well. At one point, she started posting to groups claiming I was hacking her and making her join them. I got phone calls as well and emails to the point that I stopped answering my phone unless I knew the number, a habit I still carry to this day. In the end, I deleted my old emails, my MySpace, and changed my phone number to get away from her. Though I have, in recent years, gotten mail in her name, her first and my last, and a couple magazine subscriptions, though I think they finally lapsed, since I just threw one out and gave the other to the library where my mom worked, so the renewal likely got tossed as well. I still haven't started dating again and dread the thought of it, to be honest. I finally joined Facebook a few years ago, but I still refuse to take a picture of myself and post it, or allow anyone to post my picture. That included the directory at my church. They've been fussing at me for months for refusing to have my picture taken. My email uses an assumed name, so only my FB account really offers access to me, and since there's no real identifying information, it's hard to know it's me. This is a NSFW post, so I'm just saying this, so you've been warned. This is more of a I knew we were not going to get married anymore moment, as she told me she wanted to marry me many times after a certain point in the relationship, and I thought she could possibly be the one, since we were head over heels for each other. After the first 6 months of dating we moved in together, and it was great. A few ups and downs and some fights, but we decided to have separate bedrooms because of different work schedules. But despite that we were still having sex at least 3 times a week since before, and after moving in together, we decided on a rule where we would need to do it at least 3 times a week too once we lived in the same apartment, and this usually took place in her bedroom. Eventually, after 4 to 6 months of living together, that had gone down to once a week, and after we had just gotten done doing it one afternoon I was still horny, because she was a very attractive girl, and had a way of driving me crazy wanting more after we did it, but once she finished she was out of the mood, because she would turn it off instantly. Past physical abuse by her father I would guess had something to do with it. So I decided to have some fun with myself afterwards by watching some possibly raunchy porn in my bedroom with the door closed and the volume turned down. Lo and behold, she came crashing through my bedroom door without knocking, with me barely putting my piece away in time, but not being able to minimize the window on my desktop fast enough, and when I turned around the look on her face was one of surprise and mostly pure anger that I was getting myself off in the next room watching porn, which she thought was wrong for her own personal reasons. I tried to tell her it was not a big deal, I was just turned on still because of how hot our sex had been together, and didn't want to bother her when I knew she wasn't in the mood anymore. But from pure anger or something she started crying and ran out of the room, with me having to come out after her and try to console her and explain that I was sorry and didn't mean to make her feel that way. After not being able to explain why I was doing what I was doing in a way that would satisfy her, and her trying to tell me it was wrong and I was faked up and she felt hurt, I suddenly realized deep down that we were going to break up eventually, and she was not the one I would be marrying. It's sad because several months later we did technically break up, but were still living together until our lease was over and she could move out, or I could. I kept the apartment. There was lots of other physical and mental abuse by her hand that I'm not even bringing up here that took place thanks to her father abusing her as well, but we were still sleeping together, sometimes having a very hot sex life when it did happen, and she moved in with a guy who she had been friends with since college long before knowing me, and was someone who she told me she'd never date. I had heard that before with a girl many years before who I almost did marry and was deeply in love with, but I heard those same words of this guy is just a friend and I would never date him. 10 years later this girl dated this guy right after me, and they just got married in the past 3 years and are still together, so I knew her saying that meant she would end up together with this a-hole. Go figure, they're going on their 2nd year moving in together, and they are dating, even though I still talk to her occasionally, and I know she's not truly happy, and they are having similar problems that her and I were having, so I know it wasn't just me. I wasn't surprised by all of this. I was surprised though when she called me over 6 months after she had moved out to hang out with her when her boyfriend was out of town, and that night we had sex twice. After spending all evening talking and drinking, and she admitted to me afterwards I was so much bigger and better than her boyfriend in bed, and that was the only way we fit perfectly together, and at one point she really did want to marry me. Too bad some people can make things work one way, but can't make it work in others. In the end I got to hear a lot of things from her that most men would only dream of their exes saying to them, but we had a very intense relationship over a few years and loved each other intensely, but there was a clear-cut point in ours that I knew we would not be making this work out. Coming from Wisconsin, that's all I'll say. She had already romantically shut herself off to me, but we had a kid and had been married 6 years. I'm also loyal to a damn fault and still believe she was the one for me. I just had to figure out what I was doing wrong. One night at work I left in an ambulance because of chest pains. I originally thought nothing of it, but the nurse at work and then the EMTs for me all freaked out with oh my god it's a heart attack talk, and yeah, my pulse skyrocketed and so on. So I'm freaking out and all I can think of is I'm gonna die. I'm gonna leave my beautiful wife and son behind, and it devastated me. I was crushed. I ended up having a severe case of pleurisy, lol, so no biggie. But I later told her my story and the emotions I had felt at the thought of leaving her and my boy behind, and I may as well have been talking about the weather. It had zero impact on her. That was the moment I knew she was no longer in love with me. But stupid me pushed that thought and the feelings that came with it deep inside. Fast forward a year, and I'm off work recovering from a massive injury. I fell into a deep depression due to that, and all the other shit I had been suppressing on account of having a wife that wanted a live-in sibling, not a husband. I got to a really dark place. So dark that I know I'd have swallowed a bullet if it weren't for my son. So I gave up and told the wife I needed to get myself checked in and get professional help, as I was getting bad enough I was afraid of what I might do. Her only response, Christmas is in 3 days. What the hell am I supposed to do with family events and shopping? That shit hurt. That place wouldn't take me though, as I was pretty sure I wouldn't harm myself. Once again, thanks to my boy. It took me about 6 months to recover and process it all. At which point I filed for divorce. The signs were just all too clear. I was not a husband. I was a paycheck and a symbol to her family that she had a normal family of her own. In 8 years together she only ever took 1 week off with me, and that was only after me begging for her to. After being together for 7 years and married for 4, for about a full year, one thought ran through my mind every day. I don't ever want to have kids, and I'm going to miss my wife. She wanted kids. I knew she did. I knew she would divorce me when I told her I don't want kids. Why did I marry her then? Maybe I thought I'd grow up a bit, or that every guy doesn't want kids until they're older, or that I'll be successful someday, so it won't be as hard as I fear. There are a lot of good reasons to not want to have kids. They are a huge responsibility, a financial burden, a cruel test of personal sanity and fortitude that millions of people fail miserably every single year. I know I want nothing to do with it. At work, I'd have shower thoughts of would you rather? One day, the question was, would you rather have 2 kids or have your balls chopped off cleanly with a new hatchet? The answer was obviously not kids, ever. It was the easiest decision ever, and also the hardest. The follow-up question is what arrangement would work that you'd be okay with kids. Not even simply winning the lotto would be enough. It would be boarding school and daycare. I'd prefer to have nothing to do with them. In short, I'd be a shitty parent, and I know it. I hope that clearly explains my position on this topic. I told her, and it was the clear answer, that we'd get divorced. She stayed for a few months before finding another job closer to her parents. I loved my wife. I still do, but I used to too. She was my best friend, my only friend. If she wanted to reconnect, I'd have to give it a pass. There were other issues too, like any couple would have, but it sucks that when you boil it down, she left me so that some other guy, any other guy, would father her children. I don't think about it this way because raising kids would be hell for me, and I saved myself from that. Having problems since February. I ask throughout the 7 months what's wrong? How can I better us? etc. She keeps coming back with I don't know, work is depressing, I don't know. It's now September and I'm at work just thinking about what our relationship has become. My coworker notices and he's like, dude, just don't even think about. Go home, play some games and all this will figure itself. I promise. So I stop thinking about and head home early cause I'm just not feeling good. It ain't a right day, so I get home and the wife is still at work. I grab my tablet and I hop on Instagram. I notice I got a message. I'm like, damn, who TF'd me? Open it up. How you gonna fuck me tonight? Like a dirty girl or a good girl? I happened to be logged into my wife's account. cause she was logged into my tablet. We each have our own too. The message was from her to my boss. My wife is faking my boss. So the first person I called was her. I asked, when are you gonna be home? She said about an hour. Is everything okay? I'm like, yeah, we just need to talk. The second person I call was my boss, because I obviously have his phone number. Hey, boss, can we talk for a minute? Like man to man. And he said, sure, what's this about? And I'm like, this is about my wife. He quickly goes, let me call you back on my personal. This is my work phone. I say, okay, we hang up. And he never calls again. Then she came home, and I made her explain everything. When I caught them in bed, her mom had actually told me that she had suspected an affair, and so had others. I was so married to the idea of marriage, religious upbringing, that I had stayed, like so many others. Knew we were both not happy together, but stayed for 17 years, because I didn't want to be divorced, and a failure lol. Throughout the marriage there were head games. Accusing me of abuse, even though I never laid a hand on her, actually faking a conversation with 911, believe it or not, and much verbal abuse. I disgusted her, etc. But because of religion I was dedicated to making it work. Fast forward to me catching them. Although I didn't ask for a divorce, I filed my own papers and handed them to her. And I was done. This was done while I was working 2 jobs. 8 AM till midnight 5 nights a week, so that she could stay home. Then got told that I was never home and lived work too much after I wanted to quit one of the jobs, but she didn't want me to, so we could catch up on bills. After we split up, I was extremely angry for a long time. I also lost everything but the clothes I could carry and my 20-year-old motorcycle that I would drive to work in blizzards. I believe to this day that she has bipolar disorder and have repeatedly told her she needs help, but she refused to get it. Her manic episodes are like clockwork. My daughters, 3 of them, have all gone to nursing school, and hilariously enough, as soon as they took a psych class that discussed bipolar disorder, they all called me and said, Dad, this is Mom. Everyone sees it, but sadly enough. Fast forward to now, and I can honestly say that we are really good friends, believe it or not. I'm glad to count her as a friend. Have to admit that I had my part in the divorce also, and once I got over my anger we were both willing to admit our faults. She has apologized over and over again for what she did, and I have apologized for my neglectful attitude and taking her for granted. But I continue to tell her that it's in the past and we need to focus our awesome kids. Just proof that not all divorces are a bad thing, and sometimes 2 good people are just bad for each other. Worst mistake I think people make is that whole staying together for the kids BS. You're just using your kids as an excuse to not take action and showing that it is normal to stay in a dysfunctional relationship. Please, do not make that mistake. There were a few things that had cropped over the time we'd been together and the short 4-month marriage. Now we'd known each since high school, were friends back then, kind of thought she was cute, but was more into this goth chick, and that itself ended in a fiery wreck. But fast forward several years, I'm 24 the first time we go out, we'll call her Kat for now. Somi and Kat reunite at a mutual friend's wedding. Didn't really recognize her as it had faking almost 8 years since I laid eyes on her. She was looking good, cute, and trying to chat me with up some boring stuff I wasn't paying attention to as I was eyeing her and her friend's cleavage about as subtly as Homer Simpson fax donuts. In a hoe we end up dating not long after that, but it falls through at this point due solely to my decisions, which are relevant to why we divorced. I didn't want to change my job or move 30 miles away from it. I liked living in a rural area. I liked having a large yard and dogs and my guns. Not that I had a major collection or anything. Shotgun for house stuff, hunting rifle and a pistol. And I liked to brew my own very crappy mead in the garage. It was cheap, but like some Jackson beer, it'll get you drunk. She wanted someone with more ambition, some drive, etc. Whereas I was happy, bills were paid, had some mutts, hung out with my friends 1 night a week for the D&D, and went to my pagan group 1 morning a week. Past that I more or less existed at her leisure. She didn't dig that, and we split. Skipping ahead a few more years we meet up again, I'm a bit more ambitious partially due to her dumping my eyes for lack of motivation, and I was trying to succeed out of spite against some assholes I knew. We fall right back into our relationship almost immediately, and without even really bringing it up, we are just going on dates, Netflix and chill, car search. And it goes strong for a while, but there are a few glaring problems to me. Point: she's kind of a snob. She came from a fairly well-to-do family in the region. Not millionaires, but honestly they weren't too far off from that mark. Didn't like to eat things like burgers or spaghetti, nothing she deemed poor people food. Abhorred fast food but worshipped Starbucks. So I shook it off. Then things started mounting. Got demanding about knowing my computer passwords and such, and then got a little pissed that I still watched porn. Got mad if I hung out with literally any other female that wasn't like my lesbian friend who was deemed acceptable. Got angry we weren't spending time together. I spent 5.5 days a week with her. I spent a day and a half with my friends and my religious group, which she never asked to go to either, or even really inquire on those happenings. Eventually she got angry with one of my friends who we'll call Bruce. Bruce is about the chillest dude I know. Like when he broke up with my sister, I stayed friends with him, and to this very day I'm trying to hook them back up. Then she started having seizures a lot, especially whenever I was trying to go do something that I liked, that I wanted to go do. Didn't connect the dots immediately, was just kind of like oh fuck Whiffy is seizing. She claimed to have had epilepsy, and it was being brought on by stress. I really knew nothing about it. Didn't think twice that she was drinking like a fish the entire time. Turns out, my buddy Bruce is also an epileptic, and busted her on her bullshit in private to me. I'm a reasonable guy for the most part. I'm willing to overlook a lot. But faking illnesses, sorry if incorrect term, is just faking wrong to me. So I resolved to divorce her. I was going to do so after her sister's wedding. I legitimately couldn't get the time off work and we both agreed we could use a few days to calm down from all the stress. So I was going to wait till she got back and hopefully see if she was better. 1 hour into her plane flight from the west coast to the Gulf of Mexico, I got served with divorce papers. TLDR. Wife was a controlling shrew, faked being epileptic to manipulate me, alienated me from my friends and family, and lastly beat me to the punch with a divorce after she said we'd talk about things when she got back from a wedding. I was married just over a year, but we were together for 4 years. Most if it was long distance. Being stationed overseas, we met in college and continued to talk after I joined the service. We saw each other as much as possible, which was about 1 to 2 weeks every 6 months to a year. After completing my sea time I had orders to Washington State. We got married en route to my new duty station. Thing we agreed the first few months. She then said she was tired and depressed every day, so we went to the doc to see what we could do. After some time it became quite clear that there were larger issues than just seasonal depression from the short dark days. I started getting really mean and spiteful texts while at work for things and reasons I had no clue about. Turns out she had been hiding an eating disorder and some psychological issues from me for years. So I do what any new husband does, and we go get treatment. Tricker does not cover dietitian, phycologist for a dependent. So I pay out of pocket well over 1k a month. As a refor in the military that's most, if what I make for the month. After confiding in family and dealing with the physiological games for 13 months I had a breaking point. I received a phone call at work from my wife saying she was going to kill herself. I rush home, take her to the hospital, and call her mother. Said come get your daughter. Between the time her parent drive from us to get her about 3 to 4 days I saw a lawyer drafted the paper and said anything you want leave a note on it or put it in writing. She signed the papers and left. 6 months later I was clear of a really destructive and mentally abusive relationship. Worst part is I have reason to believe that her parents knew she had issues, knew I knew nothing about them, and let me walk right into it. Not married, but I had a girlfriend who I thought was loyal throughout our 8-month relationship. It started off good in the beginning, and then it started 3 months in when this guy snuck into her room because apparently he had ran away and wanted somewhere to sleep. Posted it all over Snapchat. Then Christmas came around and I had to go back to my grandma's for family meetup. She stayed in the city while I was with my family, and she spent majority of the time around Christmas with him, and whenever I tried to call her she said she was out. Then I found pictures of her hanging with him and posting them on FB. Flash forward to February and he's over at her house and he's going over to her house almost every other weekend. I spent time with her during the week, but I always had free time on Saturday because that's when I tried to hang with her. But anyways, so then came the trust issues I had with her. I would allow her to go through my phone, but she didn't bother letting me go through it. I didn't think much of it, but I didn't care at the time. Around May I got sick of it, and then I finally told her if she wanted this relationship to keep going, she would have to stop talking to him. She claimed she did, and blocked him on everything. Then came around June and this was about the time she gave me her Snapchat login. Now on Snapchat they have this thing called memories, where you can take pictures on Snapchat, and you can save them. Anyway, so I go through her memories on Snapchat, and I find pictures of her hanging with him. Dating back a month before in May, when she went on trips with her family, and supposedly told me that it was just her fam. Instead she lied, and he was there on the trips. There was pictures of her with cuddling with him, or sleeping with him. She even took a Polaroid, and labeled it, like she was dating him. I confronted her about it, and she said oh I was messed up at the time, or I was drunk half the time, or even I just used him for weed. It messed me, and I lost all trust in her. I broke up with her, and she immediately started crying and telling me you are all I got. Please don't go. I straight up told her right there, and said well you should have thought of that when you were with him. Been out of my life for 2 years now. She didn't go back to him. Made me lose trust in relationships for a bit, and I didn't date a while. It really messed me up. Had only been married to her for a year, living in an apartment together, and not really getting along very well. She was nagging me all the time about everything, always mad when I wanted to do anything that didn't involve her. It sucked, but nothing I couldn't handle. She suggested we have a separation. I moved back in with my parents to see how she feels about the relationship while I'm gone. Turns out it was timed that way because her ex was on military leave and she wanted to fuck him in our apartment. After he left she would come over and try to act like she wanted to make it work. I had no idea what she had done yet. She says bragging about the new phone she got, so I picked it up and accidentally hit the unlock button, which I couldn't get into the phone, even if I tried, because it had a password. Didn't have to though. There was a picture of her ex on the lock screen with the text "I'll wait for you" across it. I didn't say anything, but she immediately knew what happened. Acted like she forgot something really important, grabbed her stuff and left. She had been on my computer and left so fast she forgot to log out of Facebook. Saw a conversation between her and her ex where she saw talking about how she was super drunk and didn't mean to act so clingy to him, and she enjoyed getting plowed by him the other night. Yup, it was over then. However, a week later I got a phone call from the doctor's office telling me congratulations, I'm going to be a dad. I guess she had them do a paternity test and call whoever the father was. Lucky me. Couldn't get in contact with her after that. Apparently she moved to Canada to be with some other dude. I ended up moving to Texas after that. Still married with no way to get in contact with her. Eventually she got a hold of my parents and got my contact info. Said it was finally time to get divorced. She said she didn't want anything from me and was going to pay for everything herself. What a great part of my life. Apparently she had an abortion, so no child drama. The only upside is I got a message from her years later that her current husband told her she needed to send, since she had no closure on our relationship, saying she was a horrible person at the time and I was an amazing guy who just got stuck with someone really faked up. That situation ended a lot cleaner than I could have hoped for. So while not a divorce, but a breakup, it was the first long relationship for both of us. A little under 3 years. We were on the rocks as is months with no sex, bickering, and I just wasn't in love anymore. I was getting ready to begin breaking it off, and a friend convinced me to do the opposite. Be really awesome to her, treat her great, and bring that spark back. She traveled a lot for work. One time she was gone for 3 weeks. A long time for both of us to be apart. I knew she was going to be exhausted, so I decided to do something nice for her. I cleaned the apartment from top to bottom, washed the sheets, did her laundry, got her a brand new pillow, her specific brand. Then I went to the store, got her favorite drink, alcoholic and non, all her favorite snacks, ice cream and other things. Finally, I cooked her my chili, which was her favorite. It would be done cooking right about the time she got home. I sent her a really sweet text about how much I love her, and I know she had a long trip, so I want her to relax, and I took care of everything. First text when she landed was bitching about a baby crying next to her. Then it was how long the plane was taking to taxi. Then the bags were taking forever. Then the Uber driver had no idea where he was going. Finally, she got home and texted me back, thanks for the food. I'm just going to eat a lean cuisine and go to sleep. I slaved away for almost a day making sure everything was perfect for her, and I did not even get a word of thanks. I knew at that point this was not someone I wanted to be with, and I ended it shortly thereafter.